You hear a strange word for the first time. Maybe it's kombucha. A friend says it in passing. You've never heard of it before. But then, over the next few days, you hear it again, on a podcast, on the label at the grocery store, in a random tweet. Suddenly, kombucha is everywhere. It feels like the universe is playing a trick on you. It's not. You've just experienced the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also known as frequency illusion. This phenomenon kicks in when your brain picks up on something new and starts noticing it more often. That doesn't mean the thing is suddenly appearing more frequently. What's changed is your awareness. Your brain, now alert to this new item, becomes better at spotting it. It filters the noise and picks out what it now sees as important. This response is part of how human attention works. We can't focus on everything at once. There's too much information flying at us. To manage this, our brains act like gatekeepers. They decide what to bring to our attention and what to ignore. When something is new, it jumps the queue. It gets fast-tracked because the brain assumes it might be important. Let's take another example. Say you're thinking about buying a red car, maybe a red Toyota. Before, you never noticed them. Now red Toyotas seem to be everywhere. It feels like everyone suddenly bought one, but the number of red Toyotas hasn't changed. What's changed is you. Your brain now tags red Toyota as something worth noticing. This effect ties into two mental processes. The first is selective attention. Once you notice something, your mind tunes into it. You begin to scan for it without realizing. The second process is confirmation bias. That means your brain takes the new item you noticed and then starts collecting more examples of it. The more it finds, the more it reinforces the idea that it's everywhere. This loop can feel uncanny. It gives the sense that the world is reacting to you. But it's just your own mind doing what it always does, filtering, tracking, and remembering in ways that favor what it believes to be relevant. The name Baader-Meinhof doesn't come from science. It comes from a 1990s internet forum. Someone had learned about the West German militant group called the Baader-Meinhof Gang. The next day, they heard the name again. They posted about how odd it felt. Other people joined in, saying they had the same experience with different topics. The term stuck. Later, psychologists coined the more formal term, frequency illusion. You don't need to understand the mechanics of attention to feel the effect. It can show up in casual conversations, on your social media feed, or while walking through a store. It doesn't depend on what the item is. It can be a product, a word, a person's name, a song, or an idea. People often feel like it's some kind of sign. If you're thinking about moving to a new city and then see ads for apartments there, it might feel like the universe is confirming your decision. But it's not destiny. It's just your brain doing its job, looking out for what it believes matters now. In marketing, this effect plays a big role. Say a company launches an ad campaign. At first, people don't notice it, but once someone becomes aware of the brand, they start to see the ads everywhere. This can create a sense that the brand is more dominant than it really is. The ads didn't increase. The person's attention just shifted. This also happens in health. If someone hears about a rare illness, they may start noticing people talking about it more. Or they might notice symptoms in themselves. It's not that the illness is spreading faster. It's that their mind is now on alert, watching for it. The same thing can happen in news. Say you read a story about a certain kind of crime. The next week, you see 2 more stories like it. You might think, this type of crime is on the rise, but it may not be. Your attention has just locked onto that pattern, and now your brain flags it more often. The Baader-Meinhof effect doesn't mean you're imagining things. The red Toyotas are real. The word kombucha is being said. The ads exist, but your sense of their frequency is skewed. You're paying more attention, and your mind is finding examples more quickly. You aren't seeing more, you're just noticing more. This has implications for how people form opinions. If someone believes a certain political idea and starts hearing others talk about it, they may assume it's gaining popularity. That may not be true, but because their brain is tuned in, they collect every example and reinforce their belief. The effect also influences how people make decisions. A person might think a trend is starting just because they keep seeing mentions of it, and they jump on the trend, assuming everyone else already has. But often, it's just their perception catching up to their focus. Another thing to consider is how algorithms feed this effect. Online platforms track what you click on. If you click on a story about kombucha, the system shows you more stories like it. That's not coincidence, that's machine learning. But to you, it feels like kombucha has taken over the internet. The algorithm and your brain work together to reinforce this illusion. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It helps us find patterns and stay alert to new things. But it also means our sense of how often something happens can be unreliable. Being aware of that can help people think more clearly. They can ask, has this actually increased, or am I just more aware of it? Understanding this helps reduce the feeling that the world is suddenly full of something. Often, it's not. You just opened your eyes to it. You walk into a room and feel like everyone is looking at you. Maybe your shirt has a wrinkle. Maybe you spilled coffee on your pants earlier. You're sure people are noticing. You think they're judging you for it. But in most cases, they're not. They probably didn't even notice. This is the spotlight effect. It's a bias that makes you believe others are paying more attention to you than they really are. The name comes from the feeling of standing in a spotlight. It feels like a beam of light is shining down on you, and everyone is watching. But in truth, most people are focused on themselves. They're dealing with their own thoughts, worries, and distractions. They don't have time or energy to notice everything about someone else. This idea has been tested in research. In one study, college students were asked to wear an embarrassing t-shirt, one with a big photo of a singer on it. They were then sent into a room full of other students. Afterward, they guessed how many people had noticed their shirt. They thought the number was high, but in reality, far fewer people had noticed. The spotlight effect had made them think they were more visible than they were. You can see this play out in real life. Imagine giving a presentation at work. You mess up a word. Maybe you say specifics when you meant statistics. It throws you off, and you worry the team thinks you're not prepared. But chances are, no one cared. Most people either didn't hear it or forgot it 5 seconds later. You're the only one who keeps replaying the moment. This happens because you're the center of your own world. You see everything from your point of view. You know when you're nervous. You know what you meant to say. You know how your shirt usually looks. So when something changes, even a little, you notice right away. You assume others will too. But they don't have that same context. They're not tracking your normal behavior. They only catch a small part of it, and usually they don't give it much thought. The spotlight effect doesn't just show up when you make mistakes. It can also appear when you feel underdressed, or if you trip walking upstairs, or if you forget someone's name. These moments feel large in your mind. You think, everyone just saw that. But unless you call attention to it, most people will barely react. They might forget it within seconds. This effect is more common in new or stressful situations. The less familiar the setting, the more self-aware you become. If you're starting a new job, going to a party where you don't know many people, or meeting your partner's family for the first time, you're more likely to feel like you're under a microscope. You focus more on your behavior, which makes you believe others are too. It also hits harder when you care a lot about the impression you're making. That care turns up the pressure. You want to seem smart, calm, kind, funny. So when you feel like you've missed the mark, it feels like failure. But again, people usually aren't judging you that closely. They're more focused on how they're coming across themselves. Let's say you're in a meeting and you accidentally knock over your water bottle. You clean it up, your face gets hot, and you feel embarrassed. You're sure it looked clumsy. You think everyone will remember it later, but someone else in the room might have been looking at their notes. Another might have been worrying about their own report. A third might not have noticed at all. Most of the time, the moment matters far less to others than it does to you. The spotlight effect also explains why people often feel awkward in group photos. You see the image and immediately zero in on how you look. You think your smile looks off or your eyes are half closed, but other people in the group are doing the same thing. They're looking at themselves, not you. Social media can make this effect worse. When people post something online, a photo, a story, a comment, they often assume others will study it. They might delete a post because it didn't get enough likes, or they might rethink a comment that came out slightly wrong. But in reality, most people scroll quickly. They see the post, then move on. They don't remember every word. They're not keeping track of the number of likes you get. In job interviews, people often overthink how they came across. They might worry they talked too much, didn't smile enough, or gave a weak answer to one question. These thoughts swirl in their mind afterward, but the interviewer has likely spoken with 5 or 6 other candidates. They might remember a strong answer you gave more than the weak one you fixated on. They're looking for patterns and impressions, not flaws in delivery. The spotlight effect works in reverse too. When someone else does something awkward or unusual, you probably don't think about it for long. If a coworker makes a mistake in a meeting, you might notice it, but then you focus on your own work. You don't dwell on their error. You're not judging them the way they might assume you are. The same thing applies when you're the one making the mistake. Knowing about the spotlight effect can help you feel less pressure. It doesn't make you immune to self-consciousness, but it reminds you that your internal focus doesn't match what others see. You're noticing everything about yourself because you're the one living it. Others are not. This doesn't mean people never notice anything. If something is big or repeated, like talking over others often or showing up late every day, people will likely take note. But most small things don't stick in their memory. They're not tracking your day the way you are. So when you walk into a room and feel like eyes are on you, pause for a second. Ask yourself if you're feeling the spotlight effect. Remind yourself that people are likely thinking about their own lives, not your wrinkle, your stumble, or your mispronounced word. And even if they did notice, chances are they let it go before you did. You meet someone who just started playing chess. After a few online games, they claim they've figured out the strategy. They say grandmasters aren't doing anything special. They're just moving pieces in set patterns. But when you watch them play, they fall into basic traps. They miss obvious threats. Still, they're confident they've mastered the game. This is the Dunning-Krueger effect. It happens when people with low skill in a task believe they're much better at it than they are. The effect isn't about arrogance. It's not about showing off. It's a mental blind spot. When you lack skill in a certain area, you also lack the tools to measure how much you don't know. You can't see your own mistakes clearly, so you assume you're doing better than you are. You think, this seems easy, but you don't realize what you're missing. At the same time, people with high skill tend to do the opposite. They know how much they still don't know. They see the details. They see the complexity. So they often underestimate their own ability. They might think others are just as good. They might downplay their strengths. The more they learn, the more aware they become of what they still have to learn. The term comes from a study by David Dunning and Justin Krueger in 1999. They gave people tests in logic, grammar, and humor. Then they asked them to rate how well they had done. People who scored in the bottom quarter thought they had done better than most others. They didn't just miss the questions. They didn't realize they had missed them. Their poor skill made them poor judges of their own performance. This effect shows up in many places. Think of someone just starting to learn guitar. They figure out a few chords and feel like they're ready to play on stage. But they don't know how out of tune they sound. They don't notice their timing is off. Since they lack the experience to judge those things, they assume they're doing well. Now take a skilled musician. They hear every mistake. They're aware of slight timing shifts. They notice tone problems. They might even feel frustrated with their playing. But to a beginner, they sound perfect. The gap between how people judge themselves and how others would judge them can be wide, especially when skill levels are low or high. This also happens in a workplace. A new employee may feel they're ready to lead a project after a week of training. They don't see the bigger picture. They don't know what they don't know. They overrate their understanding of the systems and processes. Meanwhile, a senior employee who knows the work well might second-guess a decision or feel like they should know even more. They're more aware of what's at stake. In education, this effect can affect how students study. A student might skim a chapter, feel familiar with the topic, and believe they've mastered it. But familiarity isn't the same as skill. When the test comes, they're surprised by how hard it is. Their confidence didn't match their preparation. On the flip side, a student who spent hours practicing problems might feel uncertain, even though they know the material well. They've seen how complex the questions can get. They've worked through mistakes. They're cautious, not because they're weak, but because they understand the challenge. The Dunning-Krueger effect doesn't mean everyone who's confident is wrong. Confidence can come from real skill. But when confidence is high and skill is low, that's when the gap becomes a problem. It can lead to bad decisions, poor planning, and missed learning opportunities. This effect can also make it hard to give feedback. Someone who overestimates their ability may dismiss correction. They might feel insulted or confused. If they don't see the mistake, they don't see why it matters. That's why learning environments that include feedback and practice are so important. They help people see where they stand. They show the gap between effort and outcome. Let's say someone starts baking. Their first cake comes out dry and uneven, but they post it online and get praise for trying. They think they nailed it. They make more cakes, each one a little off, but they don't understand why. They might blame the oven or the recipe. They don't yet have the skill to spot the real issue: mixing method, oven temperature, or ingredient ratios. They're not being careless. They just haven't learned what to look for. As they learn, things start to change. They begin to notice what a smooth batter looks like. They realize how small changes affect texture. They compare their cakes to professional ones and see the difference. Their skill increases and their confidence might dip. That dip is a sign of growing awareness. They've moved from thinking, "I've got this," to "this is harder than I thought." That stage, while uncomfortable, leads to real improvement. This pattern shows up often. When someone starts a new job, learns a language, takes up a sport, or begins investing, early confidence may be high. It feels simple at first. Then reality hits. Mistakes happen. Progress slows. Confidence drops. But with practice, skill builds again. And this time, confidence has a better foundation. People can guard against the Dunning-Krueger effect by asking for honest feedback, comparing their results to clear standards, and staying open to correction. It helps to approach tasks with curiosity, not certainty. Asking, "What am I missing?" opens more doors than saying, "I figured this out." It also helps to remember that confidence is not proof of competence. It can be misleading, especially at the start of a learning process. At the same time, people with skill should watch out for the reverse effect. Just because something feels hard doesn't mean you're doing badly. You may be seeing the challenge more clearly. You may be holding yourself to a higher standard. That's often a sign of growth, not failure. This isn't about labeling people as smart or not smart. Everyone moves through these stages when learning something new. The Dunning-Krueger effect reminds us that self-assessment can be flawed. When we lack skill, we don't just get things wrong. We often don't realize how wrong we are. That's why learning takes time, feedback, and the willingness to admit what we don't yet know. A teacher walks into class on the first day of school. She has a list with her. It tells her which students are bloomers, kids expected to grow fast in the coming months. These names came from a test, or so she's told. In truth, the list is random, but over time, something strange happens. The kids on that list actually begin to do better. They score higher, they engage more, they improve faster than others. The test was fake, but the results are real. This is the Pygmalion effect. When we expect more from someone, they tend to rise to that level. When we expect less, they tend to fall. The name comes from the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with a statue he carved. He believed so strongly in its beauty and life that the gods brought it to life. The term was first used in psychology after a study in the 1960s by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson. They wanted to see how expectations from authority figures, like teachers, could shape performance. What they found was simple and powerful. People perform better when others believe they will. The core idea is this: expectations are not just thoughts. They change how we behave. When a teacher expects a student to do well, she may give that student more time to answer, more feedback, more chances. She may smile more, give more eye contact, or be more patient. These small changes, even if subtle, add up. The student feels more confident. They become more engaged. They begin to see themselves as capable. That self-view then shapes their performance. This doesn't only happen in schools, it happens at work. A manager who believes an employee has high potential might give that person better assignments. They might offer more coaching. They may give clearer feedback or trust them with more responsibility. The employee picks up on this and responds with greater effort. They grow faster. On the other hand, an employee who is seen as average might not get the same support. As a result, they stay average or even fall behind. This effect also works in sports. A coach who believes in an athlete might push them more in practice. They might correct mistakes instead of letting them go. They might let the athlete play key minutes in games. That athlete, in turn, starts to believe in their own ability. They take the game more seriously. Their focus improves. Their performance increases. The expectation helped create the result. Expectations don't have to be spoken aloud to have an effect. People can pick up on tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language. A sigh when someone makes a mistake. A lack of eye contact. Less praise after effort. These cues can signal doubt. And when someone feels others don't believe in them, their motivation drops. They might stop trying. They might avoid risks. Their performance shrinks to fit the low expectation. This is why the reverse of the Pygmalion effect matters just as much. It's sometimes called the golem effect. When people expect failure, they often get it. A manager who sees an employee as slow may stop giving them challenges. The employee gets bored or unsure of their place. They disengage. They don't grow. The low expectation, like a trap, limits what they're allowed to become. This doesn't mean expectations can magically change ability overnight. Belief alone doesn't teach skills, but belief often opens the door. It changes how people act toward each other. That change can make it easier or harder for someone to develop. Let's take a scenario in a classroom. Two students start the year at the same reading level, but one is seen as gifted and the other is seen as average. The teacher spends more time discussing books with the gifted student. They get extra reading material. They get asked harder questions. The average student gets basic assignments, fewer follow-ups. Over time, the gifted student improves more, not because they started smarter, but because they were treated as if they would succeed. The treatment made the difference. This doesn't only affect how adults treat others. It can affect how peers act too. In a group project, if one member is seen as the smart one, others might defer to them. That person ends up taking the lead, making decisions, doing more of the work. They grow through practice. Meanwhile, the others stay quiet, take fewer risks, and don't build their own skills. Again, expectations shaped the behavior and the result. In families, the Pygmalion effect can shape how siblings develop. If one child is always called the math kid, they may begin to invest more in that subject. The other child might stop trying in math, even if they could do just as well. Labels and roles, even unspoken, carry weight. They set expectations, and those expectations often shape what people become. The Pygmalion effect can also show up in early childhood. A toddler praised for being curious may ask more questions. They feel safe to explore. One who is told, "You always break things," may stop trying new tasks. They don't want to confirm the label. Even small comments can guide behavior in the long run. In job interviews, this effect can begin before the candidate walks into the room. A strong resume might lead the interviewer to expect a top performer. They smile more, ask deeper questions, show more interest. The candidate responds in kind. The conversation flows. The impression improves. Another candidate with weaker credentials might face quicker judgments, less engagement, or harsher questions. They pick up on that. Their answers tighten. The interview goes flat. In both cases, the expectation shaped the tone, and possibly the outcome. The Pygmalion effect doesn't mean we should lie about someone's skill or ignore real gaps. But it does suggest we should check our assumptions. Are we giving someone a fair chance to show what they can do? Are we treating two people with the same starting point the same way? If not, our expectations might be making the difference, not their ability. It's not always easy to see this happening. Most people don't realize they're treating someone differently based on belief. That's why awareness matters. Being mindful of how you give feedback, offer help, or respond to mistakes can stop the effect from becoming a self-fulfilling loop. This also works in reverse, for yourself. What you expect from yourself shapes your behavior. If you tell yourself you'll never be good at public speaking, you may avoid chances to practice. You may not prepare well. Your performance will match your belief. But if you expect growth, you may invest more time. You'll try harder, recover from mistakes, and improve over time. Your expectations, quiet but powerful, help set your path. A man gives a perfect speech. He speaks clearly, makes strong points, and doesn't miss a beat. People respect him, but they feel a little distant. He seems sharp, but also hard to relate to. Now, picture another speaker who also gives a strong talk. Near the end, he knocks over his water bottle. He laughs, picks it up, and keeps going. People smile. They like him more. His small mistake didn't hurt his image. It helped. That's the Prattfall effect. When someone is already seen as competent, a harmless error can make them more likable. The name comes from the word pratfall, which means a fall on your backside, a clumsy mistake. In a study in the 1960s, psychologist Elliot Aronson tested how small slip-ups affected how people saw others. He had people listen to recordings of someone answering quiz questions. In one version, the person answered most questions correctly. In another version, the same person did well, but at the end, they spilled coffee. Listeners liked the coffee spiller more than the perfect version. The mistake made him seem more human. This effect only works when the person is already competent. If the speaker had done poorly on the quiz and then spilled coffee, people liked him less. The mistake added to the weakness. It didn't help him seem more relatable. It made him seem more clumsy. So the mistake must be small, and it must follow a strong show of ability. The reason this works has to do with how people connect. When someone appears flawless, it can feel intimidating. People might admire them, but not feel close to them. They might think, I could never be like that. But when the person makes a small, harmless mistake, it breaks the surface. It shows they're human. That creates warmth. People stop seeing only the skill and start seeing the person behind it. Imagine the job interview. A candidate walks in, gives sharp answers, and shows clear expertise. Near the end, they drop a pen and say, "Guess I'm not great with gravity today." They smile and move on. The moment doesn't take away from their skill. It shows they can laugh at themselves. The interviewer sees confidence, not arrogance. That small moment may help seal the deal. The Prattfall effect also shows up in everyday life. A friend who tells a funny story about getting lost on the way to a meeting can seem more approachable than one who always talks about success. People enjoy honesty when it's paired with competence. A mistake becomes a chance to connect. In leadership, this can be powerful. A manager who admits they forgot to send an email or who stumbles over a word in a meeting might be seen as more real. Their team sees that they're not perfect, but still effective. That lowers pressure. People feel less afraid to speak up. They know mistakes are part of the process, even at the top. But the line is thin. If the leader keeps making the same errors, or if the errors are big, missing deadlines, mismanaging projects, the effect fades. The team may lose trust. That's why the base of competence must be strong. The mistake works only because it stands out against a background of skill. Think of a chef in a busy kitchen. She moves quickly, gets orders out, and leads the team well. One night, she burns a slice of toast and jokes about it. The team laughs. The mistake is small, and they know she runs a tight kitchen. It adds charm. If she were always behind, burning things often, the same mistake would be frustrating instead. Celebrities and public figures sometimes use this effect, though not always on purpose. When someone known for talent makes a small blunder, saying the wrong word in an interview, wearing mismatched socks, it can go viral in a friendly way. Fans enjoy the glimpse of imperfection. It makes the person feel less distant. It makes them easier to root for. But when a celebrity known for making bad choices makes another one, people don't forgive as easily. That's because there's no foundation of trust or skill to fall back on. The mistake doesn't feel harmless. It feels like part of a pattern. The Prattfall effect also works in dating. Someone who shows confidence and competence, but also shares a silly moment, a stain on a shirt, a bad haircut in high school, can seem more charming than someone who tries to seem perfect all the time. Perfection can create distance. A small crack in the surface, if handled well, can build closeness. In customer service, a small error followed by a kind and honest recovery can even improve how the customer sees the company. Say a package arrives late and the company owns up to the mistake, gives a clear update, and throws in a small discount. The customer feels heard. The company seems real. In some cases, the response to the mistake builds more goodwill than if nothing had gone wrong. This effect doesn't mean people should aim to make mistakes. No one needs to trip on purpose or forget a file to seem relatable. But when mistakes happen, they don't always hurt your image. If you handle them well, and if you've shown skill before, they might actually help. People tend to fear mistakes because they assume others are judging them harshly. But the Prattfall effect shows that small errors paired with competence can work in your favor. They show confidence, not weakness. They say, I know what I'm doing, but I'm human too. Timing matters. If you spill coffee before you've said a word, it may hurt more than help. But if you've already shown you're capable, that same mistake might land with warmth. The sequence matters. Competence first, then the stake. Personality plays a role too. If someone handles the error with grace, maybe even with humor, it works better. If they react with panic or blame, the moment can shift from human to awkward. The mistake itself is less important than how it's handled. The Prattfall effect is a reminder that trying to seem perfect doesn't always lead to connection. May build respect, but not always trust. Letting a little imperfection show, when it's safe to do so, can build stronger bonds. People like people who are good at what they do, but not so perfect that they seem unreal. You hear someone say that humans only use 10% of their brains. It sounds interesting, but maybe not quite right. Then you hear it again, in a movie, on a podcast, in a conversation. After a while, it starts to feel true. You've heard it enough times that it settles into your mind as a fact. But it's not true. It never was. This is the illusory truth effect. The more often we hear something, the more likely we are to believe it, even if it's false. This effect comes from how the brain processes information. When we hear a statement for the first time, we usually ask ourselves, does this make sense? But when we hear it again, that question changes. Instead of checking the facts, our brain checks for familiarity. If it feels familiar, we're more likely to accept it as true. Repetition builds comfort. Comfort builds belief. Psychologists first studied this in the 1970s. They gave people a list of statements and asked them to say whether each one was true or false. Some of the statements were repeated later in the study. Even when they were false, the repeated ones were rated as more believable than new ones. People were not trying to be careless. They were using a shortcut. When something sounds familiar, the brain doesn't work as hard to fact-check. This plays out in daily life. Think of a rumor at work. One person says a manager is leaving. There's no proof. But the next day, someone else mentions it. Then another. The more you hear it, the more it feels likely. No new facts appear, just the same claim said again. Still, your mind starts to accept it. The repetition makes it feel real. This is especially strong when the repeated claim is simple. Short, clear statements stick more easily. A phrase like "coffee stunts your growth" is easy to remember. It fits into conversation. It sounds like it could be true. So when people hear it a few times, they stop questioning it. They repeat it to others. The cycle continues. The illusory truth effect doesn't need you to trust the source. Even if the first time you hear a claim, you doubt it, hearing it several times from unrelated places can still sway you. Your guard drops over time. The brain assumes that if something keeps showing up, there must be something to it. It confuses familiarity with evidence. This is why misinformation spreads so easily. Social media makes it worse. A false claim gets shared, then liked, then reshared. It moves fast and wide. People don't always stop to check if it's accurate. They see it again and again. The message starts to feel solid. It feels like common knowledge. Take another example. The idea that sugar makes kids hyper. Parents repeat it. Teachers say it. Ads hint at it. But study after study shows no clear link between sugar and hyperactivity. Still, the belief remains strong. Not because of new evidence, but because the message has been heard so many times. The effect also shapes how people see public figures. If a person is called corrupt often enough, that label starts to stick, even if no proof is ever shown. The word becomes attached to the name. People may not remember why they believe it. They just feel that it must be true because it keeps coming up. The same thing happens with stereotypes. A group might be described with a certain trait again and again: lazy, aggressive, greedy. Over time, those words become linked with the group, even without personal experience or facts. People accept the stereotype, not because they've tested it, but because it's familiar. This doesn't only affect false claims, it works with true ones too. Repeating real facts can help people learn and remember them, but the brain doesn't check which kind it's storing. It doesn't separate true from false based on the content. It uses the same shortcut: repeated equals reliable. People are more vulnerable to this effect when they're tired, distracted, or under stress. In those states, the brain prefers to save energy. It relies more on shortcuts. It accepts familiar ideas without much resistance. That's why propaganda often uses repetition. It doesn't try to prove anything. It just repeats a message over and over until it sticks. Even smart, careful people fall for this effect. Intelligence doesn't stop it. The bias is built into how memory and attention work. Just knowing about the illusory truth effect doesn't always protect you. You may still feel drawn to familiar claims. They still feel easier to believe. One way to reduce the effect is to pause before reacting. Ask where the information came from. Ask whether you've checked it before. Ask if hearing it again makes it feel true, or if you've seen real proof. That small break can help separate fact from repetition. It also helps to vary your sources. If you only hear one kind of message from the same kind of place, it will start to feel like the only truth. But if you hear different voices, different views, and different kinds of data, you build a fuller picture. You notice when something's being repeated without support. Consider how this works in advertising. A brand slogan gets repeated again and again, melts in your mouth, not in your hands. After a while, you don't even think about what it means. You just accept it. That familiarity becomes trust. You remember the phrase, and with it, the product. The goal isn't to explain, it's to repeat. Political campaigns use the same method. A simple message, repeated across speeches, ads, and headlines, becomes the story. Strong leadership. Out of touch. For the people. These lines aren't arguments, they're signals. When used enough, they become hard to ignore. In personal life, this can shape memory. If someone tells a story a certain way several times, people start to remember it that way, even if it's not what happened. Over time, the version that gets repeated becomes the version people believe. Memory bends toward what's heard often. This is why saying something once isn't always enough. Whether you're sharing a truth or correcting a falsehood, it often takes repetition to make it stick. One fact won't undo a dozen false claims, but steady, clear, repeated truth has a chance. The illusory truth effect is simple but powerful. It shows how belief doesn't always come from proof. It can come from repetition alone. That's why what we say and how often we say it matters more than we might think. You sit down to write an email, but halfway through your phone buzzes. You stop to check a message. Then someone calls your name. An hour later, you're doing something else entirely, but that unfinished email keeps coming back to your mind. You haven't sent it, and your brain won't let it go. That's the zigernik effect. It's the tendency to remember incomplete or interrupted tasks better than the ones you finish. The idea comes from psychologist Bluma Zigernik. In the 1920s, she noticed something while sitting in a cafe. Waiters seemed to remember unpaid orders with ease, but once the bill was settled, they forgot them quickly. Curious, she ran tests. She asked people to do simple tasks like solving puzzles or stringing beads. Some tasks were interrupted, others were completed. Later, she asked the participants what they remembered. The unfinished tasks stood out more. People forgot the completed ones. This happens because the brain doesn't like open loops. When something is left undone, it creates mental tension. That tension acts like a little alarm. It stays on until the task is closed. Once you finish it, the brain relaxes. It no longer needs to keep that item in focus. But if you stop before it's done, your mind keeps bringing it up. You see this play out every day. Think about a TV show that ends on a cliffhanger. The story isn't over. You don't have closure. So you keep thinking about it. You wonder what will happen next. You're more likely to remember the episode and come back for the next one. That pull to finish the story is part of the zigernik effect. Now imagine starting a project at work. You get the outline done, maybe a few key points, then stop for the day. Later that night, your brain keeps circling back to it. It's not complete, so it stays active in your mind. Compare that to a task you finished, say, booking a flight or submitting a report. Once done, your brain lets go. It no longer takes up space. This effect can be useful. It helps people stay aware of what still needs doing. It keeps important tasks in memory until they're resolved. But it can also create stress. If you start too many things and finish none, your brain fills with noise. You carry all those open loops with you. They keep tugging at your attention. Writers and creatives often use this effect on purpose. A novelist might end a chapter in the middle of a tense moment. The reader has to know what happens. They keep reading. A songwriter might leave a verse unresolved, then bring the answer later. The mind stays hooked on what's missing. This is how suspense works. It relies on the brain's need for completion. Students run into this too. If you stop studying mid-topic, the subject lingers in your mind. That can help with memory, if you return and complete it. But if you leave too many subjects half-learned, it can build anxiety. You're not just remembering what you know, You're holding space for everything you haven't finished. In workplaces, the zigernik effect shows up in team meetings. If someone brings up a problem but no decision is made, the issue stays active in people's minds. It doesn't go away just because the meeting ends. The mental loop stays open. Until a choice is made or a step is taken, it lingers. This effect also influences habits. If you start a daily routine and then break it partway, you're more likely to remember the break than the days you completed it. Say, you're doing a 30-day challenge. You get to day 12 and skip a day. That skipped day stands out. It nags at you. It might even push you to get back on track. The missing piece becomes the one your brain notices most. Even to-do lists can work this way. If you check off tasks as you go, you get a sense of closure. But if you leave items unchecked, they stay on your mind. The list becomes a collection of mental reminders. Each unchecked item pulls a little attention. That's why people often feel relief after finishing a list. The tension clears. The brain can finally let go. The zigernik effect doesn't need big tasks. It works with small things too. Leaving a message half-written, starting a puzzle and stopping, reading half an article. Your brain doesn't measure the size of the task. It just notices whether it's done or not. This can be helpful when learning something new. If you stop before finishing, your brain keeps the material active. When you come back, it's easier to pick up where you left off. But it only works if you return. If you leave the task open too long, the tension can fade or turn into avoidance. It can also affect sleep. If you go to bed with many open tasks, your mind may not settle. You keep thinking of what's left unfinished. That's why some people find it helpful to write things down before bed. Putting the tasks on paper gives the brain permission to pause. The loop is still open, but the brain knows it has been acknowledged. Marketers use this effect too. Ever seen a form that shows a progress bar? It might say, "Step 1 of 3 completed." That triggers the desire to finish. The same happens when a video shows a preview of what's coming next. You see part of the story, and your brain wants the rest. It draws you in. Games often rely on this. You're given a challenge, make progress, and then hit a stop. Maybe you need to wait, or pay, or come back later. The progress is incomplete. That tension keeps you interested. You remember the game more because the loop never fully closed. Even conversations follow this pattern. If someone tells you half a story, then gets interrupted, you want to hear the rest. Your attention stays with that unfinished piece. You don't just remember what was said, you remember what wasn't. People also experience this when planning events. If you've ordered food but not picked a venue, the venue takes up space in your mind. It feels bigger than the parts you've already handled. Your focus goes to what's missing. That's the core of the zigernik effect. The brain treats the unfinished as more important. It keeps it close, ready for action. It's not a flaw, it's a function. It helps you track loose ends. But when you carry too many of them, the weight grows. That's why finishing things matters. It doesn't just clear your schedule, it clears your mind. You hear a song on the radio. At first, it doesn't do much for you. A week later, you hear it again. Then again, in a store. Then again, in a friend's car. After a few more listens, you catch yourself humming along. You start to like it. Nothing has changed about the song. It's not better, it's not different. But your feelings toward it have shifted. That's the mere exposure effect. The more often you're exposed to something, the more likely you are to prefer it. This idea has been tested many times in psychology. In one classic experiment, researchers showed people a series of random shapes. Some shapes appeared just once, others were repeated. People were later asked which ones they liked more. Time and again, the shapes they had seen before were rated more favorably. The repetition had created a sense of ease. That ease felt good, so they called it preference. The same thing happens with faces. When people are shown photos of strangers, they tend to like the ones they've seen before, even if they don't remember seeing them. The effect works without conscious memory. You don't have to recall the moment of exposure. your brain still registers the pattern. The more familiar something feels, the safer it seems. The safer it seems, the more you tend to like it. This happens in daily life without you noticing. A coffee shop you walk by every day starts to feel appealing, even if you've never gone in. A logo you've seen on billboards feels more trustworthy than one you've never seen. A coworker you pass in the hall becomes easier to talk to than a new hire, even if you've never spoken to either. Familiarity builds comfort. That comfort often leads to liking. This effect shows up in relationships too. People are more likely to become friends or romantic partners with others they see often. That's not just about shared interests. It's about presence. Being around someone repeatedly can slowly shift your opinion in their favor. They feel familiar, which feels safe, which often feels good. Think about advertising. Brands repeat slogans, colors, and sounds. You might not even notice how often you've seen the same ad, but over time, you start to feel more comfortable with it. That doesn't mean you think it's the best product. It just means it feels known. That feeling alone can sway your choice. This effect also works with language. If you hear a phrase enough times, it begins to sound natural, even if it's odd or incorrect. That's why repeated headlines, even when misleading, can shape public opinion. Repetition doesn't prove truth, but it does build familiarity. And people tend to confuse that familiarity with accuracy or value. The mere exposure effect doesn't require deep attention. You don't need to study the object or understand it fully. Just being near it, seeing it, or hearing it over time is enough. That's why background music, product placement, and repeated names all matter. The brain records the exposure, even if you don't focus on it. It also doesn't only work with pleasant things. You can develop a preference for neutral or even mildly negative items if you're exposed to them enough. That's why some people grow to enjoy bitter foods, certain styles of art, or quirky films. At first, these things may seem strange. But with repeated contact, the strangeness fades. Familiarity grows. So does liking. This doesn't mean you'll grow to love anything if you see it enough. If the first experience is strongly negative, the effect may not take hold. Repetition can't override disgust or fear easily. But in neutral or uncertain cases, it works well. When your opinion is unclear, your brain often lets familiarity tip the scale. Take a classroom setting. A teacher introduces a topic that feels dull or hard. Students hear it again over several weeks. Slowly, the material becomes less strange. It starts to make more sense. Some students begin to enjoy it, not because it changed, but because they did. The topic became familiar. In social settings, this effect can influence group dynamics. A new person joins a team. At first, no one feels strongly about them, but over time, as they attend meetings and join casual chats, they become more accepted. They haven't changed their behavior, they've just become a fixture. The team likes them more, in part because they've seen them more. It even shows up in choices we think are based on logic. In voting, for example, name recognition plays a big role. Voters often choose the name they've seen before, even if they don't know the person's platform. The name feels familiar. That sense of ease leads to trust, or at least preference. You can see this in design as well. A layout or feature that's been used in many apps may be seen as intuitive. People say it's easier to use, but often it's not easier, it's just more familiar. Designers sometimes copy elements, not because they're better, but because users will already know how to use them. In customer service, this can help build loyalty. A company that keeps in touch through emails, notifications, or simple greetings can build trust over time. Even if each contact is small, the repetition builds recognition. That recognition feels warm. Warmth can lead to loyalty. The near exposure effect also explains why first impressions matter, but not always forever. Someone you meet once may not leave a strong impact, but if you keep seeing them in different contexts, your feelings can shift. The repeated contact smooths out the rough edges. You may begin to like them more than you expected. This effect can also explain why some habits stick. You try something new, a workout, a dish, a hobby, and at first it feels odd, but you do it again, then again. Soon, it feels like part of your routine. You might even start to enjoy it. That shift wasn't sudden. It came from exposure. Even in personal identity, this effect plays a part. The more often you tell yourself something, "I'm not good at math. I'm a quiet person. I don't like conflict," the more familiar that idea becomes. Over time, you may start to believe it, not because it's accurate, but because it feels true. Repetition gives ideas staying power. The near exposure effect works best when you're not aware it's happening. That's part of what makes it powerful. It doesn't push, it doesn't argue, it just repeats. And repetition, even without meaning, can change how we feel. That's how the mind often works, trusting what it knows, or thinks it knows, simply because it's seen it before. You try to explain how to tie a shoe to a child. You say, "Make a loop, wrap the other lace around it, pull it through." But they stare at you, confused. You try again, slower this time. Still, they don't get it. You feel stuck. What seems simple to you doesn't make sense to them. That's the curse of knowledge. Once you know how something works, it becomes hard to imagine not knowing it. The steps that once felt tricky now feel obvious. You forget what it was like before you learned. This bias shows up when someone with experience tries to teach or explain something to someone without it. It affects teachers, parents, managers, designers, writers, and anyone who shares knowledge. Once you've learned a task or idea, you don't just gain new understanding. You lose track of what it felt like before. You skip over key steps. You assume things are clear when they're not. Researchers first studied this in the 1990s. In one experiment, people were asked to tap out the rhythm of a popular song like Happy Birthday using just their fingers. Their partner had to guess the song. The tappers thought it would be easy. They expected most people to guess correctly, but they were wrong. Very few listeners got the right answer. The reason: once you know the tune, the beat in your head is loud and clear, but the listener only hears tapping. A gap between what you know and what others hear is wide and hard to notice when you're the one with the knowledge. You see this in classrooms. A math teacher might say, "Now we just divide both sides by 3. To a student who struggles with algebra, nothing about that is obvious. The word "just" is part of the problem. It signals that the step is easy, expected, and small. But to the learner, it's none of those things. That word tells them they're supposed to get it. When they don't, they feel slow or behind. The real issue isn't their ability, it's the assumption baked into the explanation. The curse of knowledge affects how we write. A subject expert might use jargon or skip steps, not to show off, but because those terms feel normal. A chemist might say, "This reaction releases energy as ATP," without explaining what ATP is or why it matters. They forget that others may not share their background. This isn't about arrogance. It's about blind spots. In the workplace, this bias can block communication. A senior developer might explain a bug fix using terms like refactor the class or patch the dependency. A new team member might nod, not wanting to look lost, but walk away with no clue. The expert thinks the conversation went fine. They don't notice the confusion because they can't unlearn what they already know. Designers deal with this too. If you've worked on the website for months, every button, label, and path feels familiar. You know where everything is. But a new user opens the site and gets lost. Features are buried. Navigation feels awkward. The design team didn't mean to make it hard. They just lost the beginner's point of view. Their deep knowledge of the product made it harder to see what it looks like from the outside. This also comes up in leadership. A manager who's worked at a company for years may forget what it's like to be new. They assume terms, processes, and unwritten rules are obvious. They don't explain how decisions are made or why certain steps matter. New employees feel unsure but hesitate to ask. The result is confusion, not because the workers can't learn, but because the knowledge was never made clear. Even in daily conversation, this bias shows up. You might say to a friend, "Just take the back way, go through Maple, then turn at the light by the Shell station," but they've never driven that route. You're thinking in shortcuts. They're working from scratch. You didn't mean to leave them guessing. You just forgot what it's like not to know the roads. This effect gets stronger with time. The longer you've known something, the harder it becomes to remember not knowing it. Think of reading. Once you're fluent, you can't look at a word without reading it. You can't imagine how hard it was to sound out letters as a kid. That fluency makes it harder to teach someone else how to start. You speed ahead without meaning to. It's easy to underestimate how much context others need. Imagine explaining how to bake bread. If you've done it 100 times, you might say, "Knead the dough until it's smooth." But what does smooth mean to someone who's never baked? How long should they knead? With how much pressure? A few extra words could help, but the expert skips them, not out of carelessness, but because the step feels automatic. The same problem happens when giving feedback. You might say, "Tighten this paragraph." You mean cut extra words, clarify the point, and remove repetition. But the writer hears a vague command. They may not know what's wrong or how to fix it. They're missing context. You're missing their point of view. To work around the curse of knowledge, slow down. Ask yourself what someone new would need to know. Break things down. Use examples. Avoid shortcuts unless you're sure the other person knows them too. When in doubt, explain more, not less. It's not about dumbing things down. It's about remembering what it felt like to start from zero. Testing your explanation helps. Ask someone outside your field to follow your steps or read your guide. Watch where they get stuck. If they ask, "What does that mean?" don't blame them for not knowing. Use that moment to adjust. Their confusion shows you where your assumptions are hiding. Good teaching means remembering your own learning curve. Good communication means walking at the other person's pace. The curse of knowledge makes that hard, but knowing it exists is the first step to working around it. When you catch yourself saying things like, "just," "obviously," or "of course," stop and ask, would this make sense if I were hearing it for the first time? Those words often signal that you've forgotten what it's like not to know. Removing them or explaining what they cover can make your message clearer. You can't unlearn what you know, but you can learn to pause, ask questions, and watch for signs that others are getting lost. The goal isn't to simplify everything. It's to stay aware of what the other person brings to the table and what they don't. That awareness is what turns knowledge into something you can actually share. You buy a desk from IKEA. It comes in a flat box with instructions and a small bag of tools. You spend the next 2 hours fitting it together. You read the diagrams, line up the pieces, and fix your mistakes along the way. When you finally step back and look at the finished desk, you feel proud. It's not perfect. One drawer sticks a bit, but you like it more than other desks you've owned. This is the IKEA effect. When you invest effort in making or assembling something, you tend to value it more. Researchers first studied this idea by having people build simple products like origami figures and storage boxes. They found that participants were willing to pay more for the items they built than for similar ones built by experts. Even when the work was uneven or flawed, the builders placed a higher value on their own creations. The effort had added worth, not because the result was better, but because they were part of the process. This effect shows up in many parts of life. Think of cooking. You might follow a recipe and make a basic meal. When you sit down to eat it, the food tastes better than the same dish at a restaurant. The difference isn't in the ingredients. It's in the work you put in. You chopped the vegetables, stirred the sauce, and timed the bake. You know what went into it. That time and energy shape how you feel about the result. Parents often experience this with school projects. A child brings home a model volcano or a paper on animals. It might be rough around the edges, but because the child made it, the parents see value in it. They hang it on the fridge or keep it in a drawer. It's not about the quality, it's about the connection. The effort makes it meaningful. This also happens in the workplace. An employee who builds a process or develops a system may be more attached to it than others on the team. Even if the method is slow or out of date, they defend it. They've invested time into it. They shaped it. That personal stake makes it harder to let go or see flaws. Entrepreneurs experience this too. Someone starts a small business and puts in long hours to build it. They handle every task: branding, emails, packaging, customer service. When a new person joins and suggests a better way to do things, the founder may resist. It's not just about logic, it's about pride. They built it, so it matters more to them. The IKEA effect can be helpful. It encourages people to finish tasks, take ownership, and care about their work. It can raise motivation and satisfaction. When you build something, even with help or instructions, you feel more connected to it. That connection can improve how you treat it and how long you keep it. But the same effect can cause blind spots. You might overvalue your work and ignore better options. If you wrote a law report, you may think it's stronger than it is, simply because you spent hours on it. If you decorated your living room yourself, you may ignore signs that it's cluttered or unbalanced. Your effort clouds your judgment. This bias is strongest when the effort leads to a finished product. If the task is too easy, there's not much pride. If the task is too hard and you fail, you may feel frustrated instead of connected. The sweet spot is a challenge that you complete. That mix of difficulty and success creates attachment. Think of hobbies like woodworking, sewing, or gardening. People often feel proud of their first project, even if it has flaws. A chair with uneven legs still feels valuable if you made it yourself. A scarf with missed stitches still means something. The process gives it weight. The same item made by someone else wouldn't mean as much. Group projects can show a different side of this. If several people build something together, each person may feel stronger about the parts they worked on. That can cause conflict. One person may not want to change a section they helped create. Another might be more willing to revise. The IKEA effect makes everyone hold tighter to their own piece of the work. Marketers and product designers have found ways to use this. Some brands let customers personalize or build their own products, designing a sneaker, mixing custom scents, or choosing features for a car. Even though the choices are limited, the act of shaping the product creates a feeling of ownership. People value the item more because they had a hand in it. Online tools use this too. When you fill out a profile, set preferences, or build a playlist, you start to feel like the app is yours. The platform may look the same for everyone, but your input makes it feel different. That feeling leads to longer use and stronger loyalty. You helped build the experience, so you stay with it. In education, the effect can shape learning. When students write their own study guides, explain ideas in their own words, or create projects instead of just taking tests, they often retain more. The act of building knowledge strengthens memory and value. It's not just about taking in facts, it's about doing something with them. This effect can also influence relationships. If you've helped someone grow, supported them through a hard time, or invested in their goals, you often feel more bonded to them. You've put time and care into the relationship. That effort deepens your connection. It's the same pattern. When we build something, even an emotional bond, we value it more. There's also a risk in this pattern. If you build something and others don't appreciate it, the gap can hurt. You may think, don't they see how much I put into this? But others only see the result, not the hours behind it. They judge the work, not the effort. That mismatch can lead to frustration. It helps to step back and ask, do I value this more because it's good or because it's mine? Sometimes the best choice is to improve or replace what you built. That doesn't erase your effort. It builds on it. You can keep the pride without holding on to every part. The IKEA effect isn't a flaw. It's a sign that effort creates meaning. But meaning alone doesn't always mean the work is finished. Recognizing this effect helps in giving feedback too. When someone presents work they made, they're showing something personal. Even if it needs changes, starting with respect matters. You're not just editing a file or changing a layout. You're touching something they built. That doesn't mean you avoid honest feedback. It means you handle it with care. When people invest themselves in a task, they often want others to see not just what they made, but what they put into it. Time, energy, care. The IKEA effect helps explain why we hold our own work close. Even when it's flawed, even when there's a better version out there, we like what we build because we built it. You walk into a party and see a group of friends laughing in a corner. Something about them draws your attention. One person in the group catches your eye. You think they're attractive. Later, you see that same person alone and you feel surprised. They look different. You don't find them quite as striking. What changed? This is the cheerleader effect. People appear more attractive when they're seen in a group than when they're seen alone. The name started as a joke on a TV show, but researchers took the idea seriously. They ran studies to test it. In one experiment, they showed people photos of individuals alone and then photos of the same people in a group. The results were clear. When people saw someone in a group, they rated them as more attractive than when they saw them by themselves. This effect doesn't mean people become more attractive in a physical sense. It's about perception. When the brain sees a group, it looks at the whole picture. It averages faces together. That mental average smooths out small flaws and sharp features. Faces in a group seem more balanced, more typical, and more pleasing. Part of this comes from how we process faces. The brain is good at recognizing patterns. When you see several faces at once, your brain builds a general impression. That impression influences how you judge each person in the group. If the group seems good-looking as a whole, each person benefits from the positive frame. This happens without effort. You don't sit there comparing faces or making a checklist. You just glance and get a feeling. That feeling shapes your judgment. A group of average-looking people can seem better looking together than apart. The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This also ties to attention. In a group setting, your eyes move around. You don't study each face in full detail. You take in short impressions. These fast scans tend to favor features that fit the group. That makes each person look more like the group average, which usually reads as more attractive. You can see this in photos. A group selfie often makes everyone look a bit better. When someone crops themselves out and posts a solo picture, the effect can shift. The lighting stays the same, the clothes don't change, but the perception does. The group setting gave the photo a lift. This effect isn't just about beauty, it includes context. When people are in groups, they appear more social, more engaged, and more lively. That social energy adds to the positive impression. Someone who looks serious or closed off in a solo photo may look fun and friendly in a group shot, even if their expression doesn't change. In real life, this plays out in public spaces. A person sitting at a table alone may fade into the background, but someone laughing with a group stands out. Their energy seems warmer. You assume they're liked by others. That subtle cue raises your impression of them. This also affects dating. In social apps, people often post group photos. Sometimes it's hard to tell who the main person is, but the group itself can help create a positive frame. The person seems more approachable and more attractive just by being part of a friendly crowd. Of course, this only works if the group looks genuine. A staged photo or one with mismatched energy can break the effect. Marketers use this idea without naming it. Ads often show groups of people using a product together. The group smiles, interacts, and enjoys the moment. That group setting lifts the appeal of each person in the ad. The viewer doesn't focus on any one face. They just feel that the whole group is attractive, which spills over onto the product. The cheerleader effect also links to something called social proof. When you see someone surrounded by others, you assume they must have some kind of value. People want to be near them. They must be interesting or fun. That assumption shapes how you see them. They seem more attractive because they seem wanted. This doesn't only apply to looks. It can change how competent or smart someone seems. A person speaking in a group may appear more confident than they do speaking alone. Their ideas may feel stronger. That effect comes from the social frame. The presence of others gives weight to their words. Even in professional settings, people benefit from being seen in groups. A speaker on a panel may seem more credible than someone giving a solo talk. A team presenting a project may look more polished than a lone presenter. Group settings change perception, not because of the content, but because of how the brain reads the social cues. This can also explain how first impressions shift. You might meet someone at a dinner with friends and find them charming. Later, you run into them alone and feel something is missing. Their group presence helped boost your first impression. Without it, their solo vibe feels flatter. Nothing changed about them. What changed was the frame. That frame can also work against someone. If a group seems awkward or disconnected, it can lower your impression of each person. The same person might look better in a group that's more relaxed or welcoming. The cheerleader effect isn't guaranteed. It depends on the group and how it comes across. It also works best when the group is not too large. If there are too many faces, the brain can't average them well. It gets overwhelmed. The effect works best with small groups, 3 to 5 people, where the viewer can take in the group quickly without losing focus. The timing matters too. Quick glances tend to favor the effect. If someone studies each face one by one, they may spot flaws or differences. But when they take in the whole group fast, the impression sticks. It's a fast-thinking bias, not a deep analysis. People don't always know this effect is in play. They just feel drawn to someone without knowing why. That pull often comes from how the person was first seen. Alone, they may look fine. In a group, they may look great. The difference lies not in the face, but in the setting. The cheerleader effect reminds us how much our judgments depend on context. Not just who someone is, but how they appear in the company of others. You buy a desk from IKEA. It comes in a flat box with instructions and a small bag of tools. You spend the next 2 hours fitting it together. You read the diagrams, line up the pieces, and fix your mistakes along the way. When you finally step back and look at the finished desk, you feel proud. It's not perfect. One drawer sticks a bit, but you like it more than other desks you've owned. This is the IKEA effect. When you invest effort in making or assembling something, you tend to value it more. Researchers first studied this idea by having people build simple products like origami figures and storage boxes. They found that participants were willing to pay more for the items they built than for similar ones built by experts. Even when the work was uneven or flawed, the builders placed a higher value on their own creations. The effort had added worth, not because the result was better, but because they were part of the process. This effect shows up in many parts of life. Think of cooking. You might follow a recipe and make a basic meal. When you sit down to eat it, the food tastes better than the same dish at a restaurant. The difference isn't in the ingredients, it's in the work you put in. You chopped the vegetables, stirred the sauce, and timed the bake. You know what went into it. That time and energy shape how you feel about the result. Parents often experience this with school projects. A child brings home a model volcano or a paper on animals. It might be rough around the edges, but because the child made it, the parents see value in it. They hang it on the fridge or keep it in a drawer. It's not about the quality, it's about the connection. The effort makes it meaningful. This also happens in the workplace. An employee who builds a process or develops a system may be more attached to it than others on the team. Even if the method is slow or out of date, they defend it. They've invested time into it. They shaped it. That personal stake makes it harder to let go or see flaws. Entrepreneurs experience this too. Someone starts a small business and puts in long hours to build it. They handle every task: branding, emails, packaging, customer service. When a new person joins and suggests a better way to do things, the founder may resist. It's not just about logic, it's about pride. They built it, so it matters more to them. The IKEA effect can be helpful. It encourages people to finish tasks, take ownership, and care about their work. It can raise motivation and satisfaction. When you build something, even with help or instructions, you feel more connected to it. That connection can improve how you treat it and how long you keep it. But the same effect can cause blind spots. You might overvalue your work and ignore better options. If you wrote a long report, you may think it's stronger than it is, simply because you spent hours on it. If you decorated your living room yourself, you may ignore signs that it's cluttered or unbalanced. Your effort clouds your judgment. This bias is strongest when the effort leads to a finished product. If the task is too easy, there's not much pride. If the task is too hard and you fail, you may feel frustrated instead of connected. The sweet spot is a challenge that you complete. That mix of difficulty and success creates attachment. Think of hobbies like woodworking, sewing, or gardening. People often feel proud of their first project, even if it has flaws. A chair with uneven legs still feels valuable if you made it yourself. A scarf with missed stitches still means something. The process gives it weight. The same item made by someone else wouldn't mean as much. Group projects can show a different side of this. If several people build something together, each person may feel stronger about the parts they worked on. That can cause conflict. One person may not want to change a section they helped create. Another might be more willing to revise. The IKEA effect makes everyone hold tighter to their own piece of the work. Marketers and product designers have found ways to use this. Some brands let customers personalize or build their own products. Designing a sneaker, mixing custom scents, or choosing features for a car. Even though the choices are limited, the act of shaping the product creates a feeling of ownership. People value the item more because they had a hand in it. Online tools use this too. When you fill out a profile, set preferences, or build a playlist, you start to feel like the app is yours. The platform may look the same for everyone, but your input makes it feel different. That feeling leads to longer use and stronger loyalty. You helped build the experience, so you stay with it. In education, the effect can shape learning. When students write their own study guides, explain ideas in their own words, or create projects instead of just taking tests, they often retain more. The act of building knowledge strengthens memory and value. It's not just about taking in facts, it's about doing something with them. This effect can also influence relationships. If you've helped someone grow, supported them through a hard time, or invested in their goals, you often feel more bonded to them. You've put time and care into the relationship. That effort deepens your connection. It's the same pattern. When we build something, even an emotional bond, we value it more. There's also a risk in this pattern. If you build something and others don't appreciate it, the gap can hurt. You may think, don't they see how much I put into this? But others only see the result, not the hours behind it. They judge the work, not the effort. That mismatch can lead to frustration. It helps to step back and ask, do I value this more because it's good or because it's mine? Sometimes the best choice is to improve or replace what you built. That doesn't erase your effort. It builds on it. You can keep the pride without holding onto every part. The IKEA effect isn't a flaw. It's a sign that effort creates meaning. But meaning alone doesn't always mean the work is finished. Recognizing this effect helps in giving feedback, too. When someone presents work they made, they're showing something personal. Even if it needs changes, starting with respect matters. You're not just editing a file or changing a layout. You're touching something they built. That doesn't mean you avoid honest feedback. It means you handle it with care. When people invest themselves in a task, they often want others to see not just what they made, but what they put into it. Time, energy, care. The IKEA effect helps explain why we hold our own work close. Even when it's flawed, even when there's a better version out there. We like what we build because we built it. You see someone throw a piece of trash on the ground. You shake your head and think, who does that? You mention it to a friend, expecting them to agree. Instead, they shrug and say it's not a big deal. You're surprised. You thought most people cared about littering, but maybe not. This is the false consensus effect. It's the tendency to overestimate how much other people share your views, habits, or choices. The effect works in both big and small ways. You assume most people would vote like you. You believe your taste in music is common. You think your way of solving problems is the one most people would choose. In reality, the world is more varied, but the mind likes to assume it's not. This bias shows up because we often use ourselves as a starting point. When faced with a question like, what would most people do? We answer by thinking, well, what would I do? That feels easier than gathering real data. So we take our own view and project it outward. We assume others would do the same, think the same, or choose the same. That assumption usually goes untested. Researchers have studied this in many ways. In one classic experiment, people read a story about a person in a tough situation. They had to choose how they would respond and then predict what others would choose. The result? People believed that most others would make the same choice they made. But when the answers came in, the group was often split. People just thought their choice was more popular than it really was. This also happens with beliefs. If you think a law is fair, you might assume most of your country agrees. If you think a policy is wrong, you assume others see it the same way. But public opinion often surprises us. Poll results, when they differ from what we expect, can feel like a shock. That shock comes from the gap between belief and reality, a gap made by the false consensus effect. The bias gets stronger when we spend time with people who are similar to us. If you live in a town where most people share your views, those views feel normal. If your social media feed shows you only one side of an issue, that side starts to seem like the majority. You start to believe that your group reflects the larger population. It usually doesn't. The people we see most often aren't a random sample of the world, but we act as if they are. This can cause problems in communication. You may assume someone will agree with your opinion, then get confused or annoyed when they don't. You might think a joke is harmless because you and your friends find it funny, but others see it as rude or offensive. You believe a decision is obvious, only to learn others see it as risky or strange. These moments of tension often come from assuming shared values where none exist. In the workplace, the effect can lead to poor planning. A team might believe a product feature is useful because they would use it. They assume customers will feel the same way, but customers might not. If the team doesn't test the idea with real users, they might build something no one wants. Their error wasn't laziness, it was overconfidence in shared preference. This also affects politics. People tend to think their side represents the voice of reason. They assume most people see things their way. This makes it harder to understand why someone would vote differently. The gap between groups feels wider when each side believes it's the default. The more each group believes it has the majority, the less likely it is to listen. The false consensus effect also shapes how people think about risk. Say you refuse to text while driving. You believe it's unsafe and irresponsible. Because of this, you assume most people feel the same way. Then you look around and see drivers on their phones. You feel shocked or frustrated. The truth is, more people take that risk than you thought. Your view wasn't wrong, it just wasn't as common as you assumed. The same thing happens in everyday habits. You might think most people eat dinner at the same time as you, take the same routes to work, or watch the same shows. These views aren't based on evidence. They come from what you know and what you see around you. You're not trying to be biased. You're just filling in the blanks with what feels normal. This bias can also affect conflict. In a disagreement, you might feel like you're standing with the majority. You say, everyone thinks this, or most people would agree. That gives your view more weight. But if you're wrong, it can hurt your case. The other person may know a different group with a different norm. Now the argument isn't just about the issue, it's about whose version of reality is more accurate. One of the challenges with this effect is that it's hard to see in yourself. You don't often notice when you assume too much. It feels natural to think your views are common, but asking, what evidence do I have that others agree, can slow the reflex. Checking your assumptions against facts or varied opinions helps break the pattern. It's also useful to listen for signs that others see the world differently. If someone hesitates, asks questions, or offers a different take, that's a sign. It means your view may not be as universal as you thought. You don't have to agree with them, but noticing the gap can help you respond more clearly and more fairly. In group work, the false consensus effect can be reduced by asking for input early. If you assume everyone agrees, you may miss real differences. But if you check first, you get a clearer view. That helps with decisions, plans, and outcomes. It also builds trust because people feel heard. This effect is part of how the brain saves energy. It's easier to assume consensus than to map out every opinion. But that shortcut can lead you off course. Being aware of the bias doesn't mean you stop having opinions. It means you hold them more lightly. You test them. You stay open to surprise. In the end, people aren't always like you. They don't always think what you think or want what you want. The false consensus effect hides that difference. Noticing it can help you see others more clearly and help them see you too. You buy a coffee mug at a gift shop for $5. It's plain white with a small logo on it. A few weeks later, someone offers you $5 for it. You say no. It doesn't feel like a fair trade. You want at least 8 or 10. The mug hasn't changed. It's still a $5 item, but now it's yours. That simple fact makes it feel more valuable. This is the endowment effect. People tend to value things more once they own them, even if the item has little or no actual increase in worth. Researchers first tested this by handing out simple objects, like mugs or pens, to participants. Then they asked those same people how much they would sell the items for. At the same time, they asked others how much they would pay to buy the same items. The sellers always set higher prices than the buyers were willing to pay. Just owning the object made it seem more valuable. This effect isn't about the market value. It's about perceived value. Once something becomes mine, it triggers a shift in how we think about it. We feel a kind of loss when we think about giving it up. That feeling is stronger than the feeling we get from gaining something new of equal value. In behavioral economics, this ties into loss aversion. Losing something we own hurts more than gaining something new feels good. You see this in many everyday situations. Someone tries to sell their used car. It's 10 years old and has dents, but they want more than the market says it's worth. They point to all the repairs they've made and how reliable it's been. Buyers don't care about those things. They just see the car. But the seller's connection makes the price feel too low. The car is not just transportation, it's history. That personal link adds weight. This effect shows up in housing too. A couple lists their house at a high price. They've raised kids there, hosted holidays, built a garden. To them, it's special. They believe others will see that too. But buyers walk through and see old carpets and small closets. The owners feel insulted by low offers. They're not greedy. They're just caught in the endowment effect. It also works on smaller items. You buy a t-shirt at a concert. It's nothing fancy, but it reminds you of the night. Later, you see a better shirt on sale, but you keep the old one. You don't even wear it often. Still, you won't throw it out. It's yours. It holds meaning because you bought it, not because of how it looks or fits. The endowment effect isn't limited to things. It can apply to ideas, routines, and habits. Once you adopt a method at work, you may resist changing it, even if a better option comes along. You feel invested in the old way. You helped shape it. It feels like yours. Letting go feels like a loss, not a neutral switch. That's why change at work often meets resistance, even when the benefits are clear. You also see this effect in how people react to gifts. If someone gives you a book and you don't love it, you still might keep it. The book becomes part of your shelf. Getting rid of it feels wrong, even if you know you'll never read it. You didn't pick the book, but now it's yours. The act of ownership makes it harder to let go. Online games and apps use this effect on purpose. They let users build avatars, collect digital items, or customize profiles. These features have no real-world value, but users start to care about them. Once someone owns a digital outfit or weapon, they may spend real money to upgrade it. The app hasn't added much in substance, just a stronger sense of ownership. That's enough to make people value it more. In trials or free samples, the endowment effect can show up quickly. A company might offer a 2-week trial of a paid feature. At the end of that time, you may not want to give it up, even if you didn't plan to buy it. Using it for free makes it feel like yours. Giving it up feels like losing something, not just missing out. This effect also shapes negotiations. If each side believes their offer is fair, they may get stuck. A seller values their item more because they own it. A buyer sees it as just another option. The gap isn't about facts. It's about feelings. Each person sees the same object through a different lens. One sees loss, the other sees cost. Awareness of the endowment effect can help in making decisions. If you're selling something, ask yourself whether your price reflects the market or just your attachment. If you're considering a change, at work or in life, check whether your resistance comes from value or just ownership. Are you holding on because it works or because it's yours? Marketers often lean into this effect. They use words like your plan, your cart, or your choice. These small cues create a sense of ownership before a purchase happens. Once something feels like it belongs to you, you're more likely to keep it and more willing to pay for it. The endowment effect can also explain why people collect. A coin or card becomes part of a set. It may not be rare or useful, but it's yours. Letting go would mean breaking the set. That loss feels larger than the item's value. So the collection grows. Each piece adds weight to the others. It's also part of why people hold on to things they don't need. A drawer full of old phone chargers, a closet packed with unused gadgets. These items don't serve a clear purpose, but they're hard to part with. They once had value, and they still feel like they might again. Ownership gives them a place in the mind, even if they no longer serve a role in life. This isn't always a problem. Valuing what you own can help you care for your things, stick to your goals, and appreciate what you have. But it can also block better choices. It can keep you from selling, changing, or upgrading when the time is right. The trick is to know when your attachment is helping and when it's holding you back. The endowment effect is simple. Ownership changes value, not on paper, but in the mind. Once something is yours, it feels different. You see it through the lens of loss, not gain. And that changes how you treat it. You see a story about someone getting fired after reporting a problem at work. Your first thought might be, there must be more to the story. You wonder if the person did something wrong, or if they were a difficult employee. It's easier to believe that than to accept they were punished for doing the right thing. That's the just world hypothesis. It's the belief that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. When something unfair happens, people try to explain it in ways that protect the idea of a fair world. This thinking starts early. Children learn that good behavior earns rewards and bad behavior brings punishment. That seems simple and right. It helps people feel safe. If you follow the rules, you'll be okay. If something bad happens, it must mean someone broke the rules, but the world doesn't always work that way. People suffer for reasons outside their control. Still, many find it hard to accept, so they look for reasons that explain the outcome without breaking the rule that good things happen to good people. This bias shows up in how people respond to crime victims. If someone is robbed walking home at night, people might ask why they were out alone. If a person is assaulted, others might question their clothing or behavior. These questions shift the focus from the offender to the victim. The listener wants to believe they're safe, and that bad things only happen to those who make bad choices. It's not always done on purpose. It's often unconscious. But the effect is the same. It protects the belief that the world is fair. In courtrooms, this can affect juries. If a defendant seems respectable or charming, jurors may assume they're innocent because it feels wrong to think a good person would do harm. If a victim has a rough background, some jurors might doubt their story. They might think they must have been involved somehow. These thoughts aren't based on evidence. They come from the discomfort of seeing injustice. People want to believe the system works. When it doesn't, they find ways to explain it away. This shows up in economics too. People often believe that those who are rich earned it, and those who are poor failed somehow. It's easier to think that success comes from hard work than to face the role of luck, inequality, or discrimination. If someone lives in poverty, others might assume they're lazy or made poor choices. That belief protects the idea that effort leads to reward. But many people work hard and still struggle, while others succeed through luck or support. The just world hypothesis isn't always cruel. Sometimes it pushes people to follow rules and treat others well. If you believe fairness exists, you may be more likely to act fairly yourself. But the problem comes when that belief overrides reality. When people ignore evidence of injustice just to feel comfortable, it makes the problem worse. This effect also appears in how people react to illness. If someone gets sick, others might assume they didn't take care of themselves. They ate poorly, didn't exercise, or ignored symptoms. These thoughts help the observer feel safe. If I live right, this won't happen to me. But illness doesn't always follow a pattern. Healthy people get sick. Careful people have accidents. Bad outcomes don't always have clear causes. In relationships, this bias can affect how people view breakups, abuse, or divorce. If a person is mistreated by a partner, others might say, "Why didn't they leave sooner?" Or, "They must have done something to provoke it." These questions shift the blame. They help the listener avoid the idea that someone can be hurt for no reason, even when they did nothing wrong. Again, the goal isn't to be cruel. It's to protect the belief in justice, but that belief often adds harm to the person already suffering. Media plays a role in reinforcing this view. In many stories, heroes win and villains lose. Good behavior is rewarded. Bad behavior is punished. These patterns give a sense of order, but real life doesn't follow scripts. Justice is slow or missing. Outcomes are unfair. When people compare real stories to fictional ones, they sometimes expect the same patterns. When those patterns break, it creates discomfort. That discomfort often leads to blaming the victim or ignoring the problem. This bias is strongest when people feel powerless, when faced with events they can't control, like war, natural disasters, or large-scale inequality. They cling harder to the idea that the world is fair. Believing in fairness gives a sense of order. It lowers fear. If the world is fair, you just need to behave well, and things will go your way. If the world isn't fair, then anything can happen. That's harder to face. People often use phrases that reflect this belief. What goes around comes around. They had it coming. Everything happens for a reason. These phrases may offer comfort, but they also assume a level of fairness that may not exist. They imply that outcomes are always deserved. That can lead to judgment instead of support. This doesn't mean people should give up on fairness. It means recognizing that fairness isn't guaranteed. It takes work. It requires effort from systems and individuals. Seeing the world clearly means accepting that bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people. It means helping those who suffer instead of judging them. Being aware of the just world hypothesis can help you respond with more care. When you hear a story about someone's misfortune, pause before asking what they did wrong. Ask instead what went wrong around them. What support did they lack? What systems failed them? These questions shift the focus from blame to understanding. In the workplace, this awareness can change how you view colleagues. If someone is struggling, you might assume they're unmotivated, but maybe they're overwhelmed, unsupported, or facing barriers you don't see. Assuming fairness may blind you to real problems. Looking closer may reveal ways to help. In schools, teachers may expect that hard work leads to high grades, but not all students start from the same place. Some face stress at home, learning difficulties, or lack of resources. If you assume the system is fair, you may see poor grades as a sign of laziness. If you question that assumption, you may see a student who needs support. The just world hypothesis is a comfort. It tells you the world makes sense, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's not a sign of failure on your part. It's part of being human in a complex world. You can still act fairly. You can still seek justice, but you don't need to believe that justice always happens on its own. You meet someone for the first time. They have a nice smile, dress well, and speak with confidence. Within minutes, you assume they're also smart, kind, and capable. You don't have much evidence, but something about them gives off a strong first impression. That's the halo effect. When one positive trait stands out, it tends to influence how we judge the rest of the person's traits, even if they're unrelated. This bias works fast. People often form an opinion in the first few seconds of meeting someone. If the person has one noticeable strength, that strength colors everything else. A common example is physical appearance. If someone is attractive, we tend to think they're also intelligent, honest, or skilled. But looks have nothing to do with those traits. The mind simply carries the good impression from one area into others. Researchers have tested this effect in many ways. In one study, participants watched silent videos of a teacher. The teacher was warm and friendly in some clips, and cold and distant in others. People who saw the warm version rated the teacher as more attractive, more likable, and even taller. Those who saw the cold version rated the teacher lower across the board, even though the physical features didn't change. The difference came from a single impression that spread to other judgments. The halo effect isn't always about looks. It can come from tone of voice, job title, or even a single skill. If someone speaks well at a meeting, you may assume they're also good at managing people or making decisions. If a celebrity supports a cause, people often take their opinion seriously, even if they have no expertise in the area. Their fame carries weight. One trait becomes a shortcut to trust. This bias also shows up in hiring. A job candidate with a strong resume or a polished interview style may be rated as a better fit, even if their experience is average. A well-dressed candidate may seem more competent. A confident handshake might lead an interviewer to assume the person is a leader. The actual job skills may not be tested until later, if at all. Early impressions create a halo that shapes the rest of the evaluation. In the workplace, the halo effect can influence performance reviews. An employee who excels in one area may be seen as strong across the board. A manager might say, "She's great at sales, so she's probably also good at training," without checking. This can lead to unfair promotions or misassigned tasks. The opposite is true too. If someone struggles in one area, they may be judged more harshly in others, even when they're doing fine. Teachers sometimes fall into this pattern. A student who turns in neat homework may be seen as more hardworking or responsible, even if their understanding is average. Another student who speaks up often might be viewed as smarter than they are. These judgments affect how much help students get, how they're graded, and how they see themselves. One strong or weak trait creates a lasting impression. The halo effect shapes public opinion as well. Political candidates who are good-looking or well-spoken are often seen as more trustworthy, even when people know little about their views. In elections, first impressions matter. A polished ad or a strong debate moment can build a halo that carries through the entire campaign. People may vote for a person because they feel right, not because they understand their platform. This bias also affects how we judge brands. If you like one product from a company, you might assume all their products are high quality. If you trust a brand's messaging, you might ignore flaws in their service. The good impression from one part of the experience spreads to the whole. That's why companies focus so much on design, packaging, and tone. A good first impression can carry a lot of weight. Even in friendships and dating, this effect plays a role. If someone makes you laugh, you might assume they're kind or reliable. If they show generosity once, you may think they'll always act that way. But people are complex. A good sense of humor doesn't guarantee honesty. A kind gesture doesn't mean good judgment. The halo effect skips over those checks. It creates a full picture from a single brushstroke. The danger with this effect is that it hides gaps. When you see someone in a positive light, you may overlook warning signs. You might ignore feedback that contradicts your view. You may even defend the person, saying, "They didn't mean it," or "That's not like them," based only on your first impression. This makes it hard to see people clearly. It can lead to bad hires, failed partnerships, or unfair treatment. The reverse of this is sometimes called the horn effect. If someone makes a bad impression, that single flaw can spread. A person who shows up late once may be seen as unreliable in every way. A rough tone in an email might cause others to assume they're rude or lazy. Like the halo effect, this is also a shortcut, but one that leads in a negative direction. To catch yourself using the halo effect, ask what specific evidence supports your view. If you think someone is great at their job, ask which tasks they've handled well. If you assume a person is kind, ask what actions you've seen that show that. If you like a product, ask whether it's the product itself or just the brand name that's guiding your view. Awareness helps in decision-making. In interviews, try to separate appearance and personality from the actual skills needed. In reviews, look at each part of performance on its own. In personal life, give people time to show different sides of themselves before forming a full judgment. Slowing down the process helps you see past the halo and get a more balanced view. The halo effect is part of how the brain saves time. Judging people takes effort, and the mind wants shortcuts. One strong trait feels like enough to go on, but people aren't simple. They can be confident and unprepared, charming and careless, smart and disorganized. If you let one trait shape your full view, you miss the rest of the picture. Seeing someone as a full person takes more effort, but it's more fair. You can still appreciate their strengths without letting them cover everything else. The goal isn't to stop liking people. It's to understand why you do. That way, your decisions aren't just fast. They're also right. You meet someone new at work. During your first conversation, they interrupt you. It throws you off. Later that day, you see them chatting with others, and something about their tone sounds sharp. The next week, they turn in a report with a small error. By now, you've made up your mind. You think they're rude, careless, and hard to work with. This is the horn effect. One negative trait shapes your whole view of someone, even when the rest of their behavior doesn't match it. The horn effect is the opposite of the halo effect. Instead of letting one good trait make someone seem better overall, this bias lets one bad trait cast a shadow over everything else. It's a shortcut the mind takes. Instead of judging each action on its own, the brain uses a single flaw to build a full story. That story sticks, even if new facts point in a different direction. This effect shows up in many areas of life. In school, a student who is often late might be seen as lazy, even if they turn in strong work. In the workplace, someone who's not outgoing might be labeled cold or unhelpful, even if they get the job done. In dating, a person who makes a bad first impression may be written off completely, even if they have many good qualities. That early negative impression colors everything that comes after. It can start with something small. Someone fumbles during a presentation. They mispronounce a word, or their slides don't work. From that moment on, people may doubt their competence. Later, if the same person shares a smart idea, it might not get the attention it deserves. The audience still sees them through the lens of that one misstep. The horn effect can also appear in how people judge appearances. If someone dresses in a way that seems unprofessional, others might assume they lack ability or seriousness. If someone has a strong accent, listeners might wrongly assume they're less fluent or less smart. These assumptions aren't based on facts. They're built on bias, and once formed, they're hard to change. This effect can cause real harm. In hiring, a recruiter might pass over a candidate because of one awkward moment in the interview. They focus on a single mistake and ignore the person's skills and experience. In performance reviews, a manager might give lower scores based on one incident instead of the person's full year of work. In courtrooms, a defendant's posture or tone could sway how a jury sees their entire case. One trait doesn't just stand out, it becomes the whole story. People often don't realize they're doing this. The mind moves fast. It wants to make judgments quickly. One bad signal is enough to tip the scale. Once that impression is made, confirmation bias takes over. That means you notice things that match your view and ignore things that don't. So if you've decided someone is careless, you'll spot every little mistake and miss their careful work. The horn effect works like a filter. Everything passes through it and gets tainted by it. This also happens in how people respond to negative labels. If someone is called lazy or difficult, that label spreads. Others start to treat them based on the label, not the person. The person may then act defensive or withdrawn, which only reinforces the label. The cycle keeps going. One bad impression becomes a fixed identity. Media and public opinion can show this effect too. When a celebrity or public figure makes a mistake, that mistake can define them for years. Even if they apologize or grow, the bad moment sticks. People stop seeing the full picture. They focus on the flaw. One slip becomes the story. The horn effect doesn't just affect how we judge others. It also changes how others judge us. If you make a poor first impression, it may take a long time to undo. People may not give you the benefit of the doubt. They may not notice your good work or your kindness. That one moment, one frown, one mistake, one misstep, can block the rest of what you bring. This bias can also play out across groups. If someone has a bad experience with one member of a group, they might assume negative traits about the whole group. That's how stereotypes grow. A single action becomes a stand-in for many people. The horn effect helps fuel that pattern. It ignores the variety within groups and focuses on one impression. Being aware of this bias can help break the cycle. The key is to slow down and judge people by more than one moment. Ask yourself, What do I actually know about this person's full behavior? If one trait is shaping your entire view, pause and consider whether it should. Are you seeing a pattern or just one event? It also helps to ask for feedback. If you've had a bad interaction with someone, check whether others see the same thing. Sometimes a second view can reveal a fuller picture. Maybe the person was having a rough day. Maybe they're shy, not rude. Maybe they didn't realize how they came across. Opening the door to another explanation weakens the hold of the horn effect. If you're the target of it, you may feel frustrated. It's hard to shift someone's view once they've formed it. One way to push back is through consistency. Keep doing the work. Keep showing up. Over time, repeated good actions can chip away at the first impression. It may not happen fast, but steady effort builds a new pattern. Eventually, the new signals can replace the old ones. In group settings, the horn effect can spread quickly. One person's opinion can shape how others see someone. A single story, told with enough confidence, becomes the dominant view. That's why it's important to ask, is this based on fact or just one person's feeling? Encouraging fairness and second chances helps people see beyond early missteps. This effect can show up in parenting too. A child who acts out might be seen as a problem kid. That label can stick, even when the child behaves well. Teachers, parents, and peers may miss signs of growth because they're still reacting to the early behavior. When children get locked into negative roles, it becomes harder for them to succeed. The horn effect is strong, but it's not unbreakable. It starts with noticing when one trait is shaping your full judgment. Then step back. Look for balance. Ask yourself what else is true. People are more than their worst moment. When you give them space to show that, you get closer to the truth. And when you expect that same fairness for yourself, you give others a chance to see you clearly too. You meet someone new at work. During your first conversation, they interrupt you. It throws you off. Later that day, you see them chatting with others, and something about their tone sounds sharp. The next week, they turn in a report with a small error. By now, you've made up your mind. You think they're rude, careless, and hard to work with. This is the horn effect. One negative trait shapes your whole view of someone, even when the rest of their behavior doesn't match it. The horn effect is the opposite of the halo effect. Instead of letting one good trait make someone seem better overall, this bias lets one bad trait cast a shadow over everything else. It's a shortcut the mind takes. Instead of judging each action on its own, the brain uses a single flaw to build a full story. That story sticks, even if new facts point in a different direction. This effect shows up in many areas of life. In school, a student who is often late might be seen as lazy, even if they turn in strong work. In the workplace, someone who's not outgoing might be labeled cold or unhelpful, even if they get the job done. In dating, a person who makes a bad first impression may be written off completely, even if they have many good qualities. That early negative impression colors everything that comes after. It can start with something small. Someone fumbles during a presentation. They mispronounce a word or their slides don't work. From that moment on, people may doubt their competence. Later, if the same person shares a smart idea, it might not get the attention it deserves. The audience still sees them through the lens of that one misstep. The horn effect can also appear in how people judge appearances. If someone dresses in a way that seems unprofessional, others might assume they lack ability or seriousness. If someone has a strong accent, listeners might wrongly assume they're less fluent or less smart. These assumptions aren't based on facts. They're built on bias, and once formed, they're hard to change. This effect can cause real harm. In hiring, a recruiter might pass over a candidate because of one awkward moment in the interview. They focus on a single mistake and ignore the person's skills and experience. In performance reviews, a manager might give lower scores based on one incident instead of the person's full year of work. In courtrooms, a defendant's posture or tone could sway how a jury sees their entire case. One trait doesn't just stand out, it becomes the whole story. People often don't realize they're doing this. The mind moves fast. It wants to make judgments quickly. One bad signal is enough to tip the scale. Once that impression is made, confirmation bias takes over. That means you notice things that match your view and ignore things that don't. So if you've decided someone is careless, you'll spot every little mistake and miss their careful work. The horn effect works like a filter. Everything passes through it and gets tinted by it. This also happens in how people respond to negative labels. If someone is called lazy or difficult, that label spreads. Others start to treat them based on the label, not the person. The person may then act defensive or withdrawn, which only reinforces the label. The cycle keeps going. One bad impression becomes a fixed identity. Media and public opinion can show this effect too. When a celebrity or public figure makes a mistake, that mistake can define them for years. Even if they apologize or grow, the bad moment sticks. People stop seeing the full picture. They focus on the flaw. One slip becomes the story. The horn effect doesn't just affect how we judge others. It also changes how others judge us. If you make a poor first impression, it may take a long time to undo. People may not give you the benefit of the doubt. They may not notice your good work or your kindness. That one moment, one frown, one mistake, one misstep can block the rest of what you bring. This bias can also play out across groups. If someone has a bad experience with one member of a group, they might assume negative traits about the whole group. That's how stereotypes grow. A single action becomes a stand-in for many people. The horn effect helps fuel that pattern. It ignores the variety within groups and focuses on one impression. Being aware of this bias can help break the cycle. The key is to slow down and judge people by more than one moment. Ask yourself, what do I actually know about this person's full behavior? If one trait is shaping your entire view, pause and consider whether it should. Are you seeing a pattern or just one event? It also helps to ask for feedback. If you've had a bad interaction with someone, check whether others see the same thing. Sometimes a second view can reveal a fuller picture. Maybe the person was having a rough day. Maybe they're shy, not rude. Maybe they didn't realize how they came across. Opening the door to another explanation weakens the hold of the horn effect. If you're the target of it, you may feel frustrated. It's hard to shift someone's view once they've formed it. One way to push back is through consistency. Keep doing the work. Keep showing up. Over time, repeated good actions can chip away at the first impression. It may not happen fast, but steady effort builds a new pattern. Eventually, the new signals can replace the old ones. In group settings, the horn effect can spread quickly. One person's opinion can shape how others see someone. A single story, told with enough confidence, becomes the dominant view. That's why it's important to ask, is this based on fact or just one person's feeling? Encouraging fairness and second chances helps people see beyond early missteps. This effect can show up in parenting too. A child who acts out might be seen as a problem kid. That label can stick, even when the child behaves well. Teachers, parents, and peers may miss signs of growth because they're still reacting to the early behavior. When children get locked into negative roles, it becomes harder for them to succeed. The horn effect is strong, but it's not unbreakable. It starts with noticing when one trait is shaping your full judgment. Then, step back. Look for balance. Ask yourself, what else is true? People are more than their worst moment. When you give them space to show that, you get closer to the truth. And when you expect that same fairness for yourself, you give others a chance to see you clearly too. You see someone collapse on a busy sidewalk. Dozens of people walk by. A few glance over but keep moving. No one stops. You feel unsure. Should you help? Should you call for someone else? You wait for someone to take the lead, but no one does. This is the bystander effect. When more people are present during an emergency, each person becomes less likely to act. The responsibility feels shared, so no one feels it fully. This effect became known after the 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City. Early reports claimed that dozens of people heard or saw parts of the attack, yet no one stepped in. The story was later found to be more complex, but it sparked deep interest in how people respond or fail to respond when others are in danger. Psychologists began studying this. In one experiment, people were placed alone in a room and heard someone in distress nearby. Most acted quickly, but when people believed others were also listening, they were slower to respond or didn't help at all. The more people present, the lower the chance that any one person would step in. The bystander effect happens because of two main forces: diffusion of responsibility and social influence. Diffusion of responsibility means the sense of duty spreads across the group. Each person thinks someone else will handle it. If one person were alone, no one would step in. It'd feel the full weight. But in a crowd, that weight feels lighter, even when the situation is serious. Social influence adds another layer. People look around to see how others are reacting. If no one else is moving, they assume the situation must not be that urgent. This is especially true in unfamiliar or unclear situations. If the danger isn't obvious, or if people don't know what to do, they wait. That waiting spreads. Everyone mirrors everyone else. The result is inaction. This effect isn't caused by bad intentions. People don't fail to help because they don't care. They often freeze, feel unsure, or assume they lack the skills to help. They may worry about doing the wrong thing. They may think, what if I make it worse? Or what if I look foolish? In a group, those doubts feel stronger. It shows up in minor cases too. Someone drops their bag on a train platform. If only one other person is near, they often help. If a crowd is there, people look away or think someone else will pick it up. The situation doesn't feel like their responsibility. The bystander effect also applies online. If someone posts about needing help or raises a concern in a group chat, people often wait. Each person thinks others will respond. The larger the group, the more likely it is that no one answers. Everyone assumes someone else will take care of it. It can happen in the workplace. A mistake appears in a shared document. Dozens of team members see it, but no one fixes it. Everyone assumes someone else will. A client sends a complaint to a group email. No one replies, not out of neglect, but because no one feels clearly responsible. This effect also plays out in schools. A student may be bullied in a hallway with others around. No one intervenes. Each witness feels uncertain. They look for cues. They don't want to overstep or make things worse. So they do nothing, even though many people see what's happening. It even happens in emergency situations with trained people. Paramedics, nurses, or other responders can fall into the same trap if roles are not clearly assigned. That's why emergency teams often use direct language. One person says, "You, call 911." Another says, "You, get the AED." This breaks the pattern. It gives people specific tasks. It removes the assumption that someone else will act. The way to reduce the bystander effect is to make responsibility clear. If you need help, don't call out to a crowd. Pick one person. Make eye contact. Say, "You, in the red shirt, please call for help." That kind of direction cuts through the uncertainty. It brings the responsibility back to the individual. If you're a bystander and you feel unsure, remember that inaction is also a decision. If you're in a group and see something wrong, don't wait for others to move. They might be waiting for you. Taking even a small step can break the pattern. Asking, "Are you okay?" or saying, "Let's call for help," can make a big difference. This effect doesn't mean people are cold. Most people care deeply when others are hurt or scared. But the structure of the situation, how many people are around, how clear the danger is, how familiar the setting feels, shapes how we respond. When those cues are weak or shared, action drops. That's why it helps to talk about this bias. Knowing it exists gives you a better chance of pushing past it. If you know that being in a group might make you hesitate, you can name that feeling and act anyway. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to move. Helping doesn't always mean solving the problem. It can mean finding someone who can. Calling emergency services, alerting staff, checking in. Even small actions can shift the energy of a group. Once one person acts, others tend to follow. People want to do the right thing. They often just need someone to show the way. This applies in meetings, in schools, on the street, and online. When silence fills a space where someone needs help, the group isn't heartless. It's stuck. The bystander effect has taken hold, and the way to break it isn't with blame, but with one voice stepping forward. Often, that's all it takes. You take a test and get a high score. You feel proud. You tell yourself it's because you studied hard and understood the material. A week later, you take another test and do poorly. This time, you blame the questions. You say the teacher didn't explain the topic well or the test was unfair. Your effort hasn't changed, but your explanation has. This is the self-serving bias. When things go well, you credit yourself. When things go badly, you blame something else. This bias protects your self-esteem. It helps you feel capable, smart, and in control. It feels good to believe success comes from your skill and hard work. It feels better to think failure came from something you couldn't control. This way of thinking isn't always wrong. Sometimes you really did earn the win. Sometimes the loss really was out of your hands. But the self-serving bias leans heavily toward protecting your ego, even when the facts don't fully support it. You see this bias in school. A student aces a project and says, "I'm great at this subject." But if they get a bad grade, they say, "The teacher didn't explain it right," or "the group pulled me down." In sports, athletes often credit wins to their talent and hard work, while blaming losses on bad calls, poor weather, or distractions. In both cases, the bias shifts the cause to protect the person's sense of self. In the workplace, this bias affects how people view their performance. A worker who gets praise from a manager may think, "I really nailed that presentation." But if the feedback is negative, they might say, "The team didn't give me the support I needed," or "the deadline was too tight." The same person can shift between pride and blame depending on the outcome. This also happens in relationships. After a good date, someone might think, "I'm great company." After a bad one, they may say, "The other person was rude," or "We had nothing in common." In parenting, a child's good behavior may be seen as proof of good parenting, while bad behavior may be blamed on teachers, friends, or outside influences. You can spot the self-serving bias in everyday conversation. People often say, "I worked hard for that," when something goes right, but "that wasn't my fault" when it doesn't. The pattern repeats. Success becomes personal. Failure becomes external. This protects confidence, but can also block growth. If you never see your role in mistakes, you don't learn from them. This bias shows up in group settings too. If a team succeeds, people often say "we" when talking to each other, but "I" when describing their own part to outsiders. If the team fails, individuals distance themselves. "They didn't listen to my idea," or "I knew that plan wouldn't work." Everyone wants to be on the winning side, even if it means rewriting the story. It also appears in driving. Most people believe they're better drivers than average. When they avoid accidents, they credit their skill. When they get into one, they blame the other driver, the weather, or road design. The truth might be more balanced, but the bias tilts the story to protect self-image. Social media can amplify this effect. People often share success, awards, promotions, achievements, and frame it as the result of hard work and talent. But when they talk about setbacks, They frame them as the result of poor timing, unfair systems, or misunderstandings. This shapes how others see them, but also how they see themselves. The self-serving bias isn't always harmful. It can build confidence and help people recover from failure. If someone gets laid off and believes it wasn't their fault, they may move forward more easily. If they believe they still have control over their future, they stay motivated. This kind of thinking helps protect mental health in hard times. But the bias becomes a problem when it hides patterns. If someone fails several times but always blames others, they miss the chance to improve. If a company ignores poor decisions by blaming market forces or competitors, it may repeat the same mistakes. Growth requires honest reflection. The self-serving bias makes that harder. It also affects how we judge others. We often give ourselves credit for success, but are quicker to blame others for failure. If we're late, we blame traffic. If someone else is late, we say they didn't plan well. We apply the bias in both directions, kind to ourselves, harsh to others. This double standard can damage relationships and teamwork. People sometimes hide this bias under the surface. They may not say, "I'm never wrong," but their actions show it. They reject feedback, blame others often, or avoid taking responsibility. They may become defensive when mistakes are pointed out. These signs reflect a need to protect self-image more than a desire to learn. There are ways to work around this bias. One method is to ask, "What part did I play in this outcome?" even when the result was bad. Another is to ask, "What else might have contributed to this success?" even when the result was good. These questions open the door to more balanced thinking. They help people see both internal and external causes. It also helps to separate the event from self-worth. Failing at something doesn't mean you're a failure. Making a mistake doesn't mean you're not smart. By holding that perspective, it becomes easier to admit errors without feeling attacked. You don't need to protect your ego at all costs. You can protect it by growing. When working with others, you can help reduce this bias by focusing on actions, not traits. Say, "The report missed some data, let's double-check next time," instead of, "You never do your research." This keeps the focus on improvement, not defense. When people feel safe, they can be more honest about what went wrong. In leadership, recognizing the self-serving bias helps with accountability. A good leader accepts praise with humility and takes blame when needed. They model balance. They show that strength includes owning mistakes. That builds trust and sets a tone for the team. No one escapes this bias completely. It's natural to want to feel good about yourself. It's normal to look for reasons when things go wrong. But knowing the pattern helps you see when it's leading you away from the truth. Honest thinking takes effort, but it makes your choices better, and over time, it makes your confidence stronger, because it's built on more than just a need to feel right. You decide to clean your garage. You tell yourself it'll take 2 hours, maybe 3 if you take breaks. You start in the morning. By lunch, you've cleared 1 corner. By dinner, you've made a dent, but the job isn't close to done. You're surprised, but not too surprised. It happens a lot. The task always seems simpler in your mind than it is in real life. This is the planning fallacy. It's the tendency to underestimate how long a task will take, even when you've done it before. Researchers first described this bias in the 1970s. They noticed that people often set deadlines they couldn't meet. Even with good intentions, people consistently predicted faster completion times than reality allowed. What made it more interesting was that past experience didn't fix the problem. Even when someone had done a task many times, they still expected to do it faster next time. The planning fallacy affects all kinds of work. Students underestimate how long it takes to write a paper. Teams misjudge how long it will take to finish a project. Families think they can pack for a trip in 30 minutes, but it always takes an hour and a half. The problem isn't laziness or bad memory. The problem is how the brain approaches time and effort. People usually plan by thinking about the best-case scenario. They imagine a clear path with no delays. They assume they'll be focused. Everything will go smoothly, and problems will be small or rare. They skip over the things that usually go wrong: missing tools, tired days, unclear steps, interruptions. These delays aren't new, but they're often forgotten when people look ahead. This kind of thinking is called an inside view. You focus on your own plan and hopes instead of looking at how similar tasks have gone in the past. You'll remember what the goal looks like, not what the steps felt like. So you plan based on intention instead of experience. There's also pressure to give short estimates. At work, no one wants to say, "This will take longer than you expect." People want to seem efficient. They want to set deadlines that sound reasonable. In group settings, there may be pressure to match others' expectations. If one person says the task will take a week, it's hard to say a month without sounding slow. Even solo tasks are affected. You might want to impress yourself. You tell yourself you'll wake up early, work fast, and finish by lunch. It feels good to imagine that outcome. You might even believe it, even though it hasn't happened before. This kind of self-promise feels more like motivation than denial. But when it fails, it leaves you confused. The planning fallacy doesn't just cost time, it also costs resources. If a company underestimates the time a project will take, it may also misjudge the cost. If a team thinks they'll finish a product in 6 months, but it takes a year, the budget will run short. If a home renovation is expected to take 3 weeks and lasts 3 months, stress builds, costs rise, and everyone involved feels frustrated. People sometimes adjust the plan midway, but that doesn't always help. They may keep shifting the deadline instead of questioning the method. They say, "It just took longer than we thought," as if the cause is outside their control. But the root cause is often the same each time, expecting smooth progress when the real world doesn't work that way. This fallacy shows up in writing, planning events, designing systems, launching products, and even in small chores. If you think back to the last time you said, "This won't take long," and it did, you felt it firsthand. The task didn't change. Your memory of how long it took just didn't shape your estimate the way it should have. There are ways to work around the planning fallacy. One method is to take the outside view. Instead of asking how long you think this task will take, ask how long similar tasks have taken. If writing a report usually takes 6 hours, plan for 6, not 3, even if you feel confident this time will be better. Look at real history, not imagined speed. Another strategy is to break the task into parts and estimate each part. If you're building a website, list all the steps: writing copy, designing pages, fixing bugs, testing links. Assign time to each one. This makes hidden steps visible. It also makes it easier to spot where time is likely to stretch. A vague plan like "design the site" invites underestimation. A clear list of small steps makes the time cost harder to ignore. Offering your estimates helps too. If you think something will take a day, plan for a day and a half. If it finishes early, that's fine. But if it goes long, you're not in trouble. Time buffers reduce stress and make space for mistakes, delays, or new ideas. Accountability can also help. If you tell someone else your estimate, you may think more carefully. If a team compares notes, they can spot overly optimistic timelines and balance them with other views. Talking through the steps with someone else often reveals blind spots you didn't catch on your own. Some software teams use a method called postmortem reviews. After finishing a project, they ask what went well and what took longer than expected. They write down the original plan and compare it to what really happened. These reviews help people learn from their mistakes and make better estimates next time. Even so, the planning fallacy won't disappear. It's tied to how humans see time, goals, and effort. People naturally want to believe they can do more in less time. That belief feels good. It helps people get started, but when the result doesn't match the plan, it creates a gap between the schedule on paper and the work that actually unfolds. Being aware of this gap helps you respond better. You can build in margins. You can ask better questions. You can say, "How long did this take last time?" instead of, "How fast can I finish it this time?" You can learn to expect slow days, broken tools, and unclear steps without feeling like you failed when they happen. A planning fallacy isn't about being wrong on purpose. It's about being human. It shows how hope and memory can cloud judgment. But with practice, you can see the pattern and plan with clearer eyes. You won't get it perfect, but you'll be closer, and closer is enough. You're running late for work. Traffic was heavy and you couldn't find your keys. When you finally walk in, you feel frustrated, but have a clear reason. You explain that the delay wasn't your fault. A few days later, a coworker walks in late. You look at them and think they must be disorganized or lazy. This difference in judgment is the actor-observer bias. When you do something, you blame the situation. When someone else does the same thing, you blame their character. This bias shapes how we explain behavior. As the actor, you know what's going on behind the scenes. You know your intentions, the pressures you face, and the obstacles in your way. You can see the full picture, but when you're the observer, you can only see the final act. You don't know the backstory, so you assume the behavior reflects who the person is. This effect is common in daily life. If you snap at someone, you might say it was because you were tired or had a rough day. But if someone snaps at you, you might think they're rude or unfriendly. The same action gets explained in two different ways. The gap comes from where you're standing. From the inside, actions feel like a response to context. From the outside, actions look like personality. You see this in driving. When you cut someone off, you might say it was because you didn't see them or you were trying to merge. But when someone cuts you off, you might assume they're aggressive or careless. Their action feels like a choice. Yours feels like a reaction. The explanation changes depending on who's behind the wheel. The bias affects group work. If your teammate misses a deadline, you might say they lack discipline. But if you miss one, you might explain it was because another task took longer than planned. You know your reasons, but you don't know theirs. So you judge them on the result, not the context. This happens in classrooms. A student who speaks out a lot may be seen by others as showing off. But that student might say they're just trying to stay engaged or clarify confusion. A quiet student might be seen as disinterested, but from their point of view, they may feel shy or unsure. The gap between behavior and intent is easy to miss when you're not the one acting. Even in close relationships, this bias shows up. If you forget to reply to a message, you think, "I got busy." But if your friend does the same, you might wonder if they're ignoring you. You give yourself the benefit of the doubt, but assume others have bad motives. This can lead to misunderstandings and hurt feelings. Both sides think the other is being thoughtless, while excusing their own delay as circumstantial. The actor-observer bias is related to the fundamental attribution error, which is the tendency to overemphasize personality when explaining others' actions. But the actor-observer bias includes the full picture. It shows how we explain our own behavior differently from how we explain others. It's not just about excuses. The bias also affects how we see success. If you do well on a task, you might say it was because you worked hard. If someone else does well, you might think they had help or got lucky. If you trip while walking, you say the ground was uneven. If someone else trips, you assume they're clumsy. Your own flaws have reasons. Others' flaws seem built in. This bias can affect how people judge entire groups. When someone sees a person from another background acting in a way they don't like, they may assume it reflects that person's culture or values. But when they act the same way, they explain it as a response to stress or the moment. This kind of thinking can feed into stereotypes and widen social divides. It also shapes how leaders view their teams. A manager may excuse their own poor decisions by blaming time pressure or limited information. But when an employee makes a mistake, the manager might say they lack skill or focus. This can lead to unfair evaluations and resentment. People feel judged for their character, while their leaders excuse their own errors. This bias is powerful because it feels natural. You live inside your own head. You know your reasons, your emotions, and the things that go wrong. But you don't live in anyone else's mind. Their actions arrive without context. So your brain fills in the blanks, and often fills them with judgments about character. There are ways to check this bias. One method is to ask, if I had done that, how would I explain it? That question shifts your view. It helps you see that the same behavior could have come from pressure, confusion, or stress, not just personality. Another way is to gather more information. Before jumping to a conclusion, ask what else might be going on. The more context you have, the more balanced your view becomes. It also helps to name the bias. If you notice yourself thinking, that person is just lazy, pause. Ask yourself if you're giving them the same flexibility you'd give yourself. Are you judging their whole character based on one moment? Would you want to be judged that way? In teams, this kind of thinking builds better communication. Instead of assuming someone didn't care, ask what might have been in their way. Instead of blaming character, look at the conditions. Were the expectations clear? Was the workload fair? This shift doesn't remove responsibility, but it adds a layer of understanding. The actor-observer bias can also affect how you view past versions of yourself. You might judge your younger self harshly and say, "I was so naive," instead of saying, "I didn't have the experience I have now." Being fair to yourself means applying the same standard you'd want from others, understanding the context before judging the action. This bias isn't about being wrong on purpose. It's about the limits of perspective. When you act, you see the whole picture. When you observe, you see only the surface. Recognizing this gap is the first step in closing it. It leads to fairer judgments, better decisions, and stronger relationships. And it helps you treat others the way you'd want to be treated, by seeing not just the action, but the full story behind it. You walk into a store and see a winter coat priced at $400. You wouldn't normally spend that much, but then you notice a sign showing it's on sale for $250. That seems like a good deal, so you buy it. You didn't compare the price to other coats or think about how much you usually spend. Instead, your decision was shaped by that first number, $400. That number stuck in your mind and made $250 feel reasonable. This is the anchoring effect. The first number or detail you hear sets a mental starting point, or anchor, that influences how you think about everything that comes after. This happens even when the anchor is random or clearly unrelated. In one study, people spun a wheel with numbers on it, then were asked to guess how many African countries are in the United Nations. The people who landed on higher numbers guessed higher numbers for the question, even though the two things had nothing to do with each other. The number they saw first anchored their guess. Anchoring works because people don't start fresh each time they think about a problem. They start from something they already know or something they've just seen. That anchor sets a frame. Then they adjust from there, but the adjustment usually isn't enough. The first piece of information sticks. You see this in negotiation. A seller lists a house for $600,000. That number becomes the starting point for the buyer, even if the house is worth much less. The buyer may offer $550,000 and think they're getting a deal. But if the seller had asked $500,000 to begin with, the buyer might have started even lower. The first number shapes the rest of the conversation. Retailers use this effect all the time. When they mark items 50% off, they're anchoring your mind on the original price. The discount feels big because you're starting from the higher number. If they just listed the lower price without a comparison, it might not feel like a bargain. Anchoring doesn't just affect how people think about price. It also affects how they feel about value. Anchors also affect estimates of time, effort, and risk. If you're told a task should take about 2 hours, you're likely to plan around that number, even if you have no idea how long the task really takes. If a doctor tells you that a treatment has a 90% survival rate, you feel more positive than if they say it has a 10% chance of failure, even though the facts are the same. The first number frames your thinking. Even small anchors can make a big difference. A restaurant might list one very expensive item at the top of the menu. Most people won't order it, but that high anchor makes the rest of the prices seem more reasonable. You may end up spending more than you would have if that first price hadn't been there. Anchoring shows up in performance reviews, appraisals, and grades. If a manager starts with a strong comment, the rest of the feedback may seem better than it really is. If a student gets an early high score, future grades might feel like they should match, even if the work changes. The first mark sets expectations. This bias can also shape your view of people. If someone tells you in advance that a person is smart or difficult, you're likely to look for signs that confirm that view. The first description becomes your anchor, and later experiences are judged against it. Even when new information comes in, the anchor still pulls. Anchoring can even affect your view of yourself. If you set a goal weight or income, that number sticks in your head. If you fall short, you feel like you've failed, even if you've made big progress. If you exceed it, you may stop pushing. The number itself might have been arbitrary, but it shaped your path and how you feel about the result. It also plays a role in legal settings. In court, if one side suggests a high settlement amount, that figure can become the anchor. The final decision may still go lower, but not as low as it might have if a smaller number had been introduced first. The same goes for sentencing or damages. First numbers carry weight, even when they aren't well supported. Anchoring isn't just about being tricked. It's a natural shortcut. Your brain needs a starting point, and the first number or idea it grabs onto becomes that point. The problem is that once it's there, it's hard to move away from it, even when you know it's not helpful. You can be aware that an anchor is arbitrary and still feel its pull. One way to reduce the effect is to set your own anchor. Before hearing a price or estimate, ask yourself what you think is fair. Write it down if needed. That number becomes your reference, not someone else's. In negotiations, going first can also help. If you set the anchor, the rest of the conversation adjusts around your number. Another method is to focus on range rather than a single number. If you think a task will take between 4 and 6 hours, you avoid locking into a single guess. If you compare a product across multiple stores, you see a wider range of prices and weaken the power of any one anchor. Anchoring works best when your mind latches onto a single figure. Giving yourself a wider view makes it less effective. It also helps to pause and ask where the first number came from. Was it based on real information, or was it just a starting point? Is it being used to steer your thinking? Just asking these questions puts some space between the anchor and your judgment. That space can help you think more clearly. Anchoring is simple, but powerful. One number shapes the way you see value, time, effort, and fairness. You may not notice it, but it happens often. Knowing that lets you push back. You can pause, look around, and check whether the number in your head came from a source you trust, or whether it just got there first. You're calm now. You've eaten, you're rested, and you're thinking clearly. Someone tells you they yelled at a friend during an argument. You wonder why they couldn't control themselves. It seems simple. Just stay calm. But it's not simple when you're the one feeling angry, scared, or in pain. The empathy gap is the space between those two states. It's the difficulty of imagining how you or someone else would feel or act in a different emotional state than the one you're in right now. This bias works in both directions. When you're calm, it's hard to imagine being overwhelmed. When you're overwhelmed, it's hard to imagine being calm. The same happens with hunger, pain, fear, shame, or desire. You forget how much emotions change what seems right, reasonable, or even possible. You expect yourself or others to act the same way no matter the feeling. That's rarely true. Think about someone trying to quit smoking. When they're not craving a cigarette, it feels manageable. They tell themselves they won't give in. But when the craving hits, the urge changes how they think. The rules they made in the calm moment don't feel real anymore. Later, when the craving passes, they feel confused or ashamed about giving in. They were in two different states, one where they made the plan and one where they broke it. The empathy gap kept them from understanding how much that change in feeling would affect their actions. The same thing happens with anger. You might think, I would never yell like that, because you're not angry now. But in the heat of the moment, anger can flood your system. It changes your tone, your posture, your words. It narrows your view. You don't think ahead the same way. Later, when the anger fades, it's hard to believe you acted that way. But you did, and you probably will again if you don't account for how that state feels. Pain works the same way. When you're not in pain, it's easy to say you'll tough it out or wait before taking medicine. But in the middle of pain, your priorities shift. You'll do almost anything to make it stop. That change in thinking can surprise you, even though it's common. People often underestimate how much pain will affect them or others. They plan as if people can think clearly no matter what they're going through. That leads to bad decisions. This also shows up in parenting. A parent may say they should know better about a child who acted out, but the child might have been tired, scared, or overwhelmed. If the parent doesn't remember how strong those emotions feel, they may expect more control than the child has in that moment. The empathy gap makes it harder to see what's happening from the inside out. In relationships, the bias creates misunderstandings. One partner may say, "Why didn't you just talk to me?" But the other person might have been afraid of being judged or rejected. That fear can be hard to imagine from a calm place. The gap makes it easy to forget how powerful fear can be, even in close relationships. The same goes for people in distress. If you've never been deeply anxious or depressed, it can be hard to grasp why someone can't just snap out of it. From a distance, the solution may seem clear. Get out of bed, go for a walk, talk to someone. But those things can feel out of reach in that emotional state. The empathy gap blocks that understanding. It leads people to give advice that doesn't match the situation. The bias affects planning too. You might make a budget while feeling focused and strong. You expect to stick to it, but you don't account for the stress that might lead you to shop for comfort, or the late nights that lead to food delivery instead of cooking. These aren't failures of willpower. They're shifts in emotional state. When you plan, you think from one version of yourself, but real life brings out others. The plan doesn't always hold. Judges and doctors can fall into this trap. A judge may hand down a sentence without fully grasping what jail will feel like for the person. A doctor might give a strict plan without accounting for how fear, fatigue, or pain will affect the patient's ability to follow it. Both roles involve people who are often calm, giving orders to people who are not. This also shows up in how we look at people in poverty or crisis. From a place of stability, it's easy to ask why someone didn't make a better choice. Why didn't they save more? Why didn't they get help sooner? But when you're scared or uncertain every day, it's harder to think long-term. The brain focuses on the next meal, the next bill, the next threat. From that state, decisions often change. The empathy gap can lead people to judge others harshly for choices they might make themselves under the same pressure. Even laws and policies are shaped by this bias. People who write rules often do so in calm, controlled conditions. But those rules may not work well for people in pain, panic, or crisis. If the rule makers can't imagine those states clearly, they build systems that don't fit real needs. There are ways to reduce the empathy gap. One is to pause and ask, what might I feel in that situation? Not just what you think you'd do, but what it would actually feel like. Would you feel scared, angry, helpless? Would those feelings change what seems possible? That kind of reflection brings you closer to the truth. Another method is to recall a time when you felt strong emotion and made a decision you didn't expect. That memory helps you connect to how much emotion can shift thought. It makes you more patient with yourself and with others. Listening helps too. When someone explains how they felt in a moment, take it seriously. Don't just judge their action. Ask what state they were in, what felt real to them at the time. That helps bridge the gap. It also builds trust. People don't want to be judged from a distance. They want to be understood in the moment they were in. The empathy gap isn't about being cold. It's about how the brain works. We forget what strong emotion feels like once we're past it. We plan for a calm version of ourselves and expect others to act from that same calm place. But people don't live in one state. They shift, they struggle, they react. Remembering that helps you prepare better, judge less, and respond with more care. The more you close that gap, the more real your understanding becomes. You're on a game show. 3 doors stand in front of you. Behind one is a car. Behind the other 2 are goats. You choose door 1. The host, who knows what's behind each door, opens door 3 and shows you a goat. Then he asks, do you want to stay with your choice or switch to door 2? Most people say it doesn't matter. They think there's now a 50-50 chance between door 1 and door 2. They figure the first door has the same odds as the one the host didn't open. But that's wrong. This is the Monty Hall problem. The best move is to switch. When you do, your chance of winning jumps from 1/3 to 2/3. That answer surprises many people. The setup feels simple. You had a 1 in 3 chance at the start. One door's been ruled out. Shouldn't the odds change to 50-50? It feels fair, but the math tells a different story. Here's what's really happening. When you first pick a door, there's a 1 in 3 chance you picked the car. That means there's a 2 in 3 chance the car is behind one of the other 2 doors. Now the host opens one of those other doors and shows you a goat. He'll never open the door with the car. He'll only open a losing door. That action gives you more information. If the car was behind your first pick, door 1, then switching loses. But that only happens 1/3 of the time. If the car was behind one of the other doors, and remember, that's a 2/3 chance, then switching wins. The host's action filters out a wrong door, leaving you with the right one if you switch. You don't just shift between 2 equal options. You trade a 1/3 chance for a 2/3 one. Still, it doesn't feel that way. Even after hearing the explanation, some people resist it. They stick with their first choice out of instinct. Part of this comes from loss aversion. If you switch and lose, it feels worse than if you stayed and lost. The switch feels like an active mistake. Sticking feels safer, even if the math says otherwise. Another reason people misjudge this problem is that they focus too much on the current situation. They forget how they got there. They look at the 2 remaining doors and treat them as equal, ignoring that the host's action was based on your first pick. But the process matters. The host always opens a losing door and always offers the switch. That behavior shapes the outcome. To see it more clearly, imagine a larger version of the game. Say there are 100 doors. 1 hides a car. You pick door 1. The host, who knows where the car is, opens 98 other doors, all showing goats. Now only door 1 and door 42 remain. Do you switch? Suddenly, it feels obvious. Your original choice had only a 1 in 100 chance of being right. That hasn't changed. The host's action just filtered the 99 other doors and left the one with the highest chance. Door 42 now has a 99% chance of holding the car. You'd be wise to switch. The smaller version, 3 doors instead of 100, uses the same logic, but it's harder to see. The problem doesn't feel like a math puzzle. It feels like a guessing game. That's why it tricks people. It plays on our tendency to misread probabilities when we get new information. We don't update our beliefs properly. This isn't just a game show issue. The Monty Hall problem shows up in real life. It appears anytime we make decisions based on partial information. Think of job interviews. You choose a candidate. Then you get more information about the other options. Do you stay with your first choice or rethink it? Is that new information is filtered or selective, like the host's action? It changes the odds, but only if you understand how. Or consider medical testing. Suppose a patient gets a positive result from a test. Does that mean they likely have the condition? Not how the process shapes the result. That's a kind of Monty Hall mistake. Even in simple choices, people often overvalue the option they picked first. You might order food at a restaurant and then see a better dish after placing your order. You stay with your first choice, even though you now have new data. The first pick feels like a commitment. The switch feels like a risk. But sometimes the better choice only becomes clear once new information appears. If you don't account for how that information came to you, you might stick with a worse option. The Monty Hall problem shows how people struggle with conditional probability. That's the chance of something happening, given that something else already happened. When the host opens a door, he changes the situation. But people often act as if nothing changed. They see the problem in static terms, not as a sequence of events. That's where the mistake happens. To get better at these kinds of problems, practice thinking in steps. Ask yourself what happened first, what changed, and how the change was based on what you did. Break down the process. Don't just look at the final moment. Think about the setup and the rules. In Monty Hall, the host's knowledge and choices aren't random. They're built into the game. They give you more to work with, if you notice it. This idea applies beyond logic puzzles. Anytime you're faced with new information, consider how that information got to you. Who chose what to show you? What did they know? What didn't they reveal? Like the host opening a door, their actions may not be neutral. They might tell you something important, if you look past the surface. The Monty Hall problem feels like a trick, but it's not. It's a clear example of how human intuition about chance often fails. They look at what's left and forget how they got there. But randomness doesn't always feel random, and new information doesn't always mean equal odds. Sometimes switching is the smarter move, no matter what your instincts say. You watch a person on a screen saying something. The audio says ba, and you hear ba. Then the video changes. The sound stays the same, still ba. But the mouth movement changes to look like it's saying fa. Now you hear fa. The sound didn't change, but your brain did. What you saw changed what you heard. This is the McGurk effect. It shows how vision can override hearing when both senses process speech at the same time. This effect was first described in the 1970s by researchers Harry McGurk and John MacDonald. They were studying how children understand speech. They found that when kids watched a person say one sound while hearing another, they didn't pick just one sense. Instead, their brains blended the two. Adults do the same. When the mouth says ga and the audio says ba, people often hear da. That sound doesn't match either input. It's the brain trying to make sense of two clashing signals. You can test this yourself. There are many videos online showing this effect. If you close your eyes and just listen, you hear one thing. If you open your eyes and watch the speaker's lips, your hearing changes. The McGurk effect is strong. Even when you know what's happening, you can't easily unhear it. The illusion stays. Your brain fuses sound and sight into one experience. This happens because speech is multisensory. You don't just use your ears to understand it. You use your eyes too. You watch lips, jaw movement, tongue position, and facial tension. These small visual cues help you figure out what someone is saying. They're especially useful in noisy places, like restaurants or busy streets. Your brain weighs all inputs and combines them into a final guess. Usually, this works well. It helps fill in gaps when sound is unclear. But it also means that when vision and sound don't match, the brain can create a third, wrong result. The McGurk effect isn't a trick. It's a sign of how the brain naturally works to make speech clearer, even when it goes off course. You see this effect more clearly in certain sound combinations. It works best with consonants like B, F, G, and D, sounds made with clear mouth shapes. If someone says ba, but their lips move as if saying va, your brain might hear something between the two. Vowels don't create the same effect. Their mouth shapes are more subtle, so the illusion is weaker. The effect also depends on language and familiarity. If you understand the language being spoken, the McGurk effect is stronger. Your brain has learned what to expect and relies more on visual cues to support comprehension. If you hear a language you don't know, the effect weakens. Your brain isn't trying to match sound and sight in the same way. Age matters too. Young children, especially those learning language, are more sensitive to this effect. They're still building the link between what they hear and what they see. Older adults may rely more on visual cues if hearing fades, which can make the effect stronger. But everyone is affected to some degree. Even trained audio professionals or speech scientists can't fully block it. This effect is not a sign of weakness or confusion. It's a normal feature of how the brain processes complex input. Speech is fast. Sounds often blend. Words can be slurred. Noise can hide key syllables. So the brain uses all available signals to improve accuracy. Vision helps clarify sound. It usually works, but sometimes it causes misperception. The McGurk effect has real-world impacts. In video calls, if audio and video are out of sync, speech feels harder to follow. Your brain can't match the mouth movement to the sound. Even a slight delay makes comprehension harder. This is why many video apps focus on keeping lips and voices aligned, even if that means lowering quality elsewhere. The effect also shows why clear visuals help people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Lip reading is not just a backup, it's part of how speech is understood. Subtitles help too, but the shape of speech on the face adds valuable information. For people who rely more on visual cues, mismatched audio can create real confusion. In classrooms or training videos, if the speaker's face isn't visible, learners lose a major source of information. When someone wears a mask or speaks behind a barrier, the listener gets less input. This makes speech harder to understand. The brain can't use its full toolkit. Actors, newscasters, and speech therapists all learn how important lip movement is. Small changes in jaw or lip position affect how clearly a sound comes across. Even in radio or podcasts, speakers are often trained to over-enunciate, knowing that the loss of visual cues makes speech harder to follow. There are also limits to this effect. If the mismatch between audio and video is too wide, say someone's mouth says no while the sound says yes, the brain doesn't blend them. It notices the conflict. But when the sounds are similar in tone and rhythm, the fusion feels natural. That's when the illusion is strongest. The McGurk effect also shows how much perception is shaped by expectation. Your brain doesn't just take in raw data, it builds a model. When sight and sound don't line up, it updates that model the best it can. This is useful in most situations, but it means you don't always hear what's actually said. You hear what your brain thinks fits the situation. Your brain combines input to create a single experience. When you touch something that looks hot, it can feel warm, even if it's not. When a flash and a beep happen together, you may think they're connected. Perception is a mix of senses, not a simple stream of isolated facts. The McGurk effect reminds us that perception is built, not recorded. Your senses feed your brain, but your brain decides what you experience. It does the best it can with the information it has. Most of the time, that process works well, but now and then, it creates an illusion. You think you heard something you didn't, just because of how the speaker's mouth moved. That moment is a glimpse into how your mind works, fast, smart, and always looking to make sense of the world, even if it sometimes gets the details wrong. You walk into a store to buy jam. You see a table offering samples, 24 different flavors. You taste a few and feel impressed by the variety, but you leave without buying anything. The next week, you return and see a smaller table, just 6 flavors this time. You sample 2 and buy a jar. This isn't a fluke. Studies have shown this pattern. When people are offered fewer options, they are more likely to make a decision and feel good about it. This is the paradox of choice. More options seem like they should lead to better decisions, but often they lead to paralysis and regret. Choice sounds like freedom. The more choices you have, the more control you think you have over your life. That's the idea many people grow up with. But choice also means effort. Every option requires attention, comparison, and time. As the number of options grows, so does the mental load. You weigh each one, trying to figure out which is best. At some point, the task becomes too much. This happens in everyday decisions. You want to watch a movie. You open a streaming app. You scroll through hundreds of titles. You make a list. You watch trailers. You pause, trying to decide between a drama and a comedy. After 30 minutes, you're tired. You may settle on something half-heartedly or give up and watch nothing. You had all the freedom, but no clear path. The paradox of choice explains why this happens. With fewer options, your brain compares easily. You can rank 3 or 4 options and feel confident. With 20 or 30, the job gets harder. You start thinking about what you might miss. What if another choice would be better? That doubt creeps in, and it stays even after you choose. This doubt grows into regret. Even if you like the option you picked, you may wonder about the others. Was that restaurant better than the one you chose? Would another shirt have fit better? You imagine all the benefits of the paths you didn't take. The one you did choose starts to feel smaller. The more options you had, the more likely you are to regret your choice, even when the outcome is good. You also raise your expectations. When you know there are many options, you expect one of them to be perfect. You don't want good enough. You want the best. If your choice doesn't fully satisfy you, you feel like you failed. But no choice is perfect. Every option has trade-offs. The more you expect from a decision, the more likely you are to feel let down. This shows up in dating apps. You swipe through profiles, each one a new option. With so many people to choose from, it's hard to settle. You may always feel like a better match is just one more swipe away. That endless pool of choice makes real connection harder. You might second-guess a good match because of who else is out there. It happens in careers too. People have more paths open than ever before. That can be freeing, but it also makes it harder to choose. Should you follow your passion, take a stable job, start a business? The range of options brings pressure. You don't want to pick the wrong one, so you delay. You research more. You switch paths often. And even after making a choice, you may look back and wonder. The same issue affects shopping. Online retailers offer thousands of items. You search for a new pair of running shoes and find 300 results. The filters help, but you still feel overwhelmed. You try to compare prices, brands, reviews, and features. The process drags on. You might buy something and later feel unsure, or you might not buy at all. Some people try to avoid this feeling by sticking with the same choice. They always buy the same brand, go to the same restaurant, wear the same clothes. This limits options and reduces stress. It may seem boring, but it often brings more peace. With fewer decisions, the brain relaxes. The person feels more confident and less regretful. This doesn't mean fewer choices are always better. If you have too few options, you may feel trapped or resentful. The key is balance. People want variety, but they don't want to drown in it. A small set of good options gives a sense of freedom without the burden of endless comparison. Some environments are designed with this in mind. Fast food menus often highlight a few combo meals. Clothing websites may offer curated collections. Supermarkets organize shelves to make certain items stand out. These systems guide choice without removing it. They reduce effort while keeping control in the hands of the buyer. People also cope with choice overload by using shortcuts. They follow recommendations, trust reviews, or stick with familiar brands. These shortcuts aren't perfect, but they lower the mental load. A decision becomes simpler. The outcome feels more satisfying. The paradox of choice can also change how people view responsibility. When you have many options, you feel more in control. But if your choice leads to a bad outcome, you may feel more to blame. You picked it. You had all the options. Why didn't you choose better? The freedom that was exciting at first becomes a source of pressure. The more you think your happiness depends on making the right choice, the more stressed you become while trying to make it. To ease this pressure, some people choose to limit their choices on purpose. They adopt habits or rules to make decisions faster. They may decide to buy from only one store, eat from a set menu, or pick from a limited color palette. These self-imposed limits create structure. They reduce noise, and often they lead to better satisfaction. In teams or organizations, the same principle applies. Too many options in a meeting or project can stall progress. People debate endlessly. No decision feels strong enough. Clear criteria and a short list of strong choices keep things moving. Decision fatigue drops. Results improve. You don't need to avoid choice, but it helps to be aware of how too much of it can hurt. A long list of options isn't always a gift. It's often a weight. Recognizing that weight lets you plan around it. You can focus on what matters. You can reduce the noise, and you can choose with more ease. Not because you found the perfect option, but because you've made peace with the trade-offs. You meet someone you don't like much. Maybe you think they're arrogant. Maybe they brushed you off once. Then they ask you for a favor. It's small. Maybe they need to borrow a book or ask for a quick opinion on something. You help them out, mostly to be polite. A few days later, you notice your opinion of them has softened. You don't mind talking to them. You might even enjoy it. You didn't expect this shift. You didn't change because of what they did for you. You changed because of what you did for them. This is the Ben Franklin effect. Benjamin Franklin described this in his autobiography. He had a political rival who didn't like him. Instead of trying to win the man over with praise or favors, Franklin asked to borrow a rare book from his collection. The man agreed. Franklin returned the book with a note of thanks. After that, the man treated him with warmth and respect. They became friends. Franklin believed that when someone does you a favor, they start to like you more because their actions need to match their beliefs. This effect comes from a kind of mental tension called cognitive dissonance. If you do something kind for someone you don't like, your brain has to explain why. The easiest explanation is that maybe you don't dislike them after all. Your action forces your thoughts to shift so they match. You think, if I helped this person, I must have a reason. Maybe they're not so bad. It doesn't work the other way. If someone does you a favor, it doesn't always mean they like you more. In fact, it might make them like you less if they feel used. But when you're the one giving the favor, your brain looks for a story that makes your action feel right. That story often involves shifting your view of the other person. You can see this in group settings, in schools or workplaces. Asking for small help from someone who seems distant can build trust. You ask for feedback or advice. They help. Over time, the act of helping changes how they see you. They become more open, more friendly. It doesn't feel forced. It feels earned. Managers sometimes use this effect without realizing it. When a boss asks for help from someone on the team, and that help is taken seriously, the employee often becomes more engaged. They see their role as more valuable. They start to feel more invested in the manager's success. That small request opens a new kind of loyalty, not because the boss gave more, but because they asked. This effect also appears in friendships. If someone helps you through a tough time, you may feel grateful, but if you help them through one, you often feel closer. You put in the time, you showed up. Your brain rewrites the relationship to make that effort feel worth it. You care more because you gave more. You might expect that doing someone a favor would drain your energy or patience, but in many cases, it increases your goodwill toward them. You feel responsible for them. You see their needs and struggles more clearly. Helping shifts your perspective. You move from outsider to participant. The Ben Franklin effect also explains why volunteer work builds connection. People who volunteer for a cause often start to feel more deeply tied to it. They give their time, and in doing so, convince themselves the cause must matter. Their effort changes their belief. This can happen even when the cause wasn't that important to them at first. It also plays out in negotiations. If you're in a conflict and ask your counterpart for a small concession, a piece of advice, a bit of flexibility, and they agree, they may start to see the relationship differently. They may feel more open to compromise. They see themselves as someone who cooperates. That shift can break tension and open the door to real progress. The effect is strongest when the favor feels personal. A task that requires a little time or thought works better than one that's automatic. If someone clicks a button for you, that might not change how they feel. But if they spend 5 minutes writing an email or answering a question, that effort changes the dynamic. This effect also helps explain how people justify past behavior. If someone has treated another person kindly over time, even if they didn't like them at first, their view often changes. They want their feelings to match their history. If you give someone multiple chances, help them through mistakes, or defend them to others, your brain wants a reason. It decides they must be worth it. This isn't always conscious. People don't sit down and decide to like someone after helping them. The shift happens quietly. It grows over time. You look back on your actions and adjust your thoughts to make the story feel right. That story becomes your new belief. You can use this effect in careful ways. If you want to build a connection with someone who seems distant or unsure, ask for something small. A simple favor, a bit of input, a small piece of help. Don't overdo it, don't manipulate, but create the conditions for the relationship to shift. Let their own action do the work. It's important to note that this effect doesn't work if the favor feels forced. If someone feels pressured or tricked, they won't feel warmer toward you. In fact, they may pull away. The key is that the favor must feel voluntary and reasonable. When that's true, the effect can be strong and lasting. The Ben Franklin effect also reminds us how much behavior shapes belief. People think beliefs come first and actions follow. Often, it's the reverse. You act, then adjust your thinking to match. That's why change sometimes starts with small steps. A shift in behavior leads to a shift in mindset. That shift creates new outcomes. This effect works both on you and those around you. If you want to change how you feel about someone, try helping them. Even if you don't want to, even if you think they don't deserve it, the act itself may open the door. It doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior, but it gives you a different view, one shaped not by judgment, but by participation. The Ben Franklin effect doesn't mean every favor leads to friendship, but it shows that kindness isn't always the result of liking someone. Sometimes it's the cause. When you do something for another person, you invest in them. That investment grows, and what felt like a small step becomes the start of something real. You're writing a story, solving a problem, or brainstorming ideas. Suddenly, something clicks. You get a thought that feels fresh and sharp. You write it down or say it out loud. It feels original. But later, someone tells you they said the same thing last week. Or you hear the idea in an old podcast and realize you listened to it months ago. You didn't mean to copy. You weren't trying to steal. You just forgot where it came from. This is cryptomnesia, the failure to remember the source of an idea while believing it's your own. The word combines crypto, meaning hidden, and mnesia, meaning memory. It describes what happens when memory hides its own trail. The idea returns, but the source doesn't. Your brain retrieves the content, but drops the label. Without the context, it feels like it came from you. This happens more than people think. It's not about dishonesty or laziness. It's a natural feature of how memory works. When you learn something, your brain stores it in pieces. The content goes one place, the source goes another. Over time, the content often stays while the source fades. That's why you might remember a joke, but not who told it, or a phrase, but not the book it came from. In creative fields, this causes problems. Writers, designers, musicians, and researchers all work with ideas. They take an input all the time. Then they try to make something new. But sometimes, what feels new is just old material returning in disguise. A melody sounds original because the composer doesn't remember hearing it years earlier. A student writes a sentence and doesn't realize they're echoing a lecture. These aren't cases of theft. They're memory errors. Even legal disputes have come from cryptomnesia. A songwriter creates a hit only to get sued because it sounds like another track. In some cases, the similarity is close enough to suggest copying, but if the artist truly didn't know where the idea came from, it's a hard line to draw. The courts sometimes rule that the copying was subconscious. That's the heart of cryptomnesia. The idea was copied, but not on purpose. One famous example involves George Harrison of the Beatles. His solo song, My Sweet Lord, was found to be too similar to He's So Fine by the Chiffons. Harrison said he didn't realize he'd copied the melody. The court believed him, but still ruled it was subconscious plagiarism. He had heard the original. It had stuck in his mind. Then it resurfaced when he was writing something new. That's classic cryptomnesia. It also happens in everyday life. During a meeting, someone shares an idea. You agree, and the conversation moves on. A week later, you say the same idea, thinking you came up with it. You're not lying. You truly believe it's yours. The original wing had faded. The concept stayed. You forgot the part where you heard it from someone else. People often blame others for this. They say, "You stole my idea." And sometimes that's true, but not always. Cryptomnesia explains how good people end up taking credit by mistake. It's not about ego. It's about how hard it is to track the source of every thought. This bias shows up in group work. If you work on a project with others, you all contribute bits and pieces. Later, it's hard to sort out who said what first. The ideas blur. If you remember refining an idea, you may think you created it, but someone else might have sparked it. That's not selfishness. It's just how shared memory works. People also misremember who gave them advice. You might pass along a tip to a friend, thinking you figured it out, but your brain may have picked it up from a podcast, a parent, or an old teacher. The idea felt right, and you repeated it. But somewhere along the way, you lost the tag that said where it came from. This isn't just about intellectual property. It affects trust. If someone takes credit for your idea, even by accident, it feels like betrayal. That's why it helps to understand cryptomnesia. It lets you approach these moments with more patience. You can say, "I think I mentioned that earlier," and give the other person a chance to realize the error without feeling accused. There are ways to lower the risk of cryptomnesia. One is to keep notes. When you read something interesting or hear a good idea, write down the source. Tag quotes or inspirations in a notebook or document. This habit builds a paper trail you can check later. It doesn't stop all errors, but it helps. Another method is to pause before claiming something as your own. Ask, where might I have heard this before? If it came to you too easily, it might not be new. A little doubt can protect you. It keeps you open to correction and reduces the chance of passing off someone else's work as your own. You can also build habits of giving credit often. If you're not sure where something came from, say so. "I heard this somewhere," or "this might not be original," are small phrases, but they show awareness. They invite others to help track the source. That builds trust, and shows respect for shared ideas. Teachers and leaders can help by encouraging environments where people value collaboration over ownership. If you create a space where ideas are shared, shaped, and improved by many people, the need for strict authorship softens. The focus shifts from who said it first to how it's used well. Cryptomnesia also reminds us how fragile memory is. We like to think of it as a record, solid and exact, but it's more like a puzzle that gets reshuffled over time. You remember parts. You forget others. You fill gaps without realizing it. That doesn't make your memory useless. It just makes it human. Understanding this bias doesn't excuse careless copying. People still need to check their sources, cite others, and respect creative work. But it adds a layer of understanding. It shows why smart, honest people sometimes make these mistakes. It also helps explain why repetition matters. When an idea shows up again and again, it's more likely to feel like part of your own thinking. You can see cryptomnesia in conversations, schoolwork, product ideas, and even personal stories. You may tell a story as if it happened to you, only to find out later it was something you read or heard. Memory blurs the line. What starts as input becomes part of your inner world. Later, you draw on it without knowing you reached outside yourself. In the end, cryptomnesia is a reminder to stay humble about your own ideas. Many thoughts feel original, but come from layers of influence. That doesn't make them less useful or interesting. It just means you're part of a network, taking in, processing, and sharing what you've gathered along the way. You sit through a class or a meeting. You take notes. You feel like you've learned something useful. The next day, you remember most of it. A few days later, you remember less. A week goes by, and it's down to a few scraps. You didn't mean to forget, it just faded. This isn't about intelligence or effort. It's how memory works. In the 1880s, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus studied this pattern and mapped it out. What he found became known as the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. The curve shows how fast memory fades when you don't review or use the information. Right after you learn something, you can recall nearly all of it, but memory drops quickly. Within a day or two, you lose a large portion. After that, the decline slows, but it continues. Eventually, you may forget almost everything, especially if the material wasn't tied to something meaningful or repeated often. Ebbinghaus discovered this by testing himself. He memorized lists of nonsense syllables, random combinations like zat or li-q. These had no built-in meaning, so they were hard to remember without effort. He measured how much he forgot after set periods of time: 20 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day, and so on. The pattern was clear. Without review, memory dropped fast. This curve doesn't just apply to syllables. It affects everything you learn: facts, names, processes, languages. The speed of forgetting varies depending on how the material was learned, how meaningful it is, and how often it's used. But the pattern holds. If you don't review or apply what you learn, you'll forget most of it. You might notice this after reading a book. Right after finishing, you can summarize the plot or ideas. But a week later, only parts remain. After a month, you might struggle to recall key points. Or you attend a workshop and leave with a strong sense of understanding. A few days later, that understanding feels distant. This is the forgetting curve in action. The good news is that you can slow the curve. The most effective way is through spaced repetition, reviewing information at increasing intervals. Instead of cramming once, you revisit the material after a day, then a few days, then a week, and so on. Each review strengthens the memory and makes it last longer. You don't need to relearn everything from scratch. A short review is enough to bring the idea back and reinforce it. This method works because memory isn't fixed. It strengthens with use. When you retrieve a memory, you reactivate it. That reactivation helps your brain hold on to it. The more you recall something, the more stable it becomes. This is why practice tests are more effective than rereading. Active recall beats passive exposure. Imagine learning someone's name at a party. If you don't say it again or think about it, you'll probably forget it by morning. But if you use the name several times during the conversation, recall it the next day, and see the person again within a week, you're more likely to remember it long term. That's spaced repetition without flashcards, just natural review. Students often fall into the trap of cramming. They study hard the night before a test, do well, and then forget most of it within days. Cramming fills short-term memory, but it doesn't build long-term memory. Without review, the forgetting curve kicks in fast. That's fine if you only need the knowledge once. But if you need it later, like in a future course, on the job, or in real life, it won't be there. The curve also matters at work. You might attend a training session and leave feeling prepared, but without follow-up, you'll forget most of it. That's why good training includes refreshers, check-ins, or real practice. Without those, the material fades. Managers may wonder why employees can't recall what they were taught. Often, it's not a lack of effort. It's just the curve at work. People assume forgetting is a flaw, but it's a feature of how the brain works. You take in more information than you need, and the brain clears out what seems unused. Forgetting helps focus on what matters now. It keeps your mind from being cluttered, but it also means that if something is important, you need to signal that to your brain by reviewing, using, or connecting it to something else. Emotion and meaning also help. You're more likely to remember things tied to strong feelings or personal relevance. A fact about your friend's birthday sticks better than one from a textbook. A story tied to your work stays longer than an abstract rule. This is why teaching methods that involve stories, examples, and real-life connections often lead to better retention. The forgetting curve isn't just a theory. It shapes how learning tools are built. Language apps like Duolingo use spaced repetition. So do many flashcard systems, such as Anki. These tools track when you last reviewed a word or fact and schedule the next review at the right time, just before you'd forget it. This keeps the memory active without wasting time. A curve also helps explain why long-term habits are hard to form. You might read something inspiring and want to change how you eat, work, or sleep. But if you don't reinforce that message, it fades. A single moment of insight doesn't stick unless you return to it. This is why repetition is key in habit building, not just doing the action, but repeating the thinking behind it. Teachers, trainers, and mentors can use this knowledge to design better learning. Instead of delivering information once, they can build in short reviews. Instead of assuming a one-time lesson will stick, they can plan for return. Even a short recap or quiz can change the curve. It's not about more time, it's about timing. The curve also applies to skills. If you learn to code, play a chord, or tie a knot, you'll forget it unless you practice. You might think, I learned this once, I'll remember. But without use, the steps blur. Practice doesn't just improve skill, it preserves memory. That's why even experts rehearse basics. Memory isn't static, it needs upkeep. Understanding the forgetting curve doesn't mean you need to fear forgetting. It just means you need to work with it. Review what matters. Use what you learn. Space it out. Make it active. Memory isn't about cramming in facts and hoping they stay. It's about shaping your learning to fit how your brain really works. The curve shows the drop, but it also shows where to intervene.